It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
How's it going, everybody? This is One on One, 90.7 FM, WFUVSports.org, YouTube, however you may be joining us. We are here for the next 3 hours, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. on this Saturday, January 16th. The Jets find their new head coach in Robert Saleh. The Yankees get deals done with LeMahieu and Kluber. And Sam and I sit down with Craig Carton of WFAN and Jon Helmkamp of Deadspin. All that and more over the next 180 minutes. The guy on the other side of my Zoom screen is Sam Davis. Kelly Bright will be joining us with the headlines a little later. Nick DeLuca here with you. Sam, so much to unpack in a wild last couple of days with LeMahieu and Kluber, the Jets finding their new head coach. You can go wherever you want here, but just there's a bunch of stuff to get to.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we say there's a lot of stuff to get to when there might not be a ton going on, but right now there actually is a ton to get to. We have a ton of New York sports this week. I feel like it was just breaking news central every day. Felt like something new was dropping, something new was happening. I'm excited to get into all of it with you, Nick.
For sure. And I'm inclined to start with the Jets making a head coaching hire because you're trying to, in this time when your team is not in the playoffs, looking towards the future. And it became very clear pretty quickly this year that Adam Gase was not going to return. And then the head coaching search for Jets fans had been occurring since around week 4. So now they finally have their guy. It's Robert Saleh, the former 49ers defensive coordinator. Rumors that he will be bringing 49ers passing game coordinator Mike LaFleur, brother of Matt, coach of the Packers, in as his OC as well. So your sort of initial reaction to that, I thought it was a pretty good hire by the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard a bad thing about this guy yet. So obviously I was impressed. I was a little surprised. I expected the Jets to take a little longer. You know, they interviewed a ton of guys. So that was a little surprising. But after that initial surprise, I was very pleased with the move. I think just changing in an attitude is the biggest thing from Saleh versus what Gase was. And I think that'll help this program a lot in this organization because obviously we know there's a long way to go. It's not going to happen overnight. Saleh's got a long journey ahead of him, but it seems like he's up for the task and he's just an upbeat, energetic attitude that I think will help this organization a ton down the stretch here for this team.
It's been funny to me to watch this last cycle of coaching hires because I feel like it's a sort of complete 180 from what we had seen even the last couple of years with the Sean McVays of the world, Zach Taylor going to Cincinnati, where there was sort of the, okay, if you've ever had interaction with Sean McVay, you're getting a head coaching job. Teams really trying to find this offensive whiz kid, even Adam Gase, presumably falling into that category of we want this guy who's this offensive tactician who's going to help develop our quarterback and we're going to be good there. And yet now, as teams look at some of the organizations that have had success, the Buffalo Bills and Sean McDermott, defensive coach and a guy who's really come in and brought a great culture to that organization. Brian Flores, who's had success in Miami of really being a culture guy as a defensive coach. It seems to me that there are teams that are more focused in that area. And that's not just for the Jets because Robert Saleh is a very good defensive coach, but a guy who they want to bring in because he will change their culture. The same way the Detroit Lions, apparently after Dan Campbell, who's the tight ends coach for the New Orleans Saints, and everyone's saying, okay, what the heck is going on here? They want a guy who's going to come in and change their culture. They tried it with Matt Patricia. It didn't work. So it's interesting to me to see some of this market shift, right? There's a difference in sort of what teams are looking for now. Whereas a couple years ago, teams are looking for that next guy who's going to come in and really help them with their quarterback situation. Some of those hires haven't worked. I think that's why Eric Bieniemy is still out there on the market, though I think he will eventually get a job with some of the openings here if he wants one. The ones that are left are not as desirable, and that's usually how those things work. But I'm interested in that, and they're hoping that Saleh is going to come in and change the culture. That's really the thing, because this is a team that's really struggled at times to go in the right direction. I will give Adam Gase a little bit of credit where it's due, because they were able to manufacture those 2 wins. And of course, Jets fans saying, no, we wanted to go in 16 to get the number 1 pick, but those guys never quit on Adam Gase. Which, as much as that was the narrative, I will say there is, he again, as I said on an NFL Friday a couple weeks ago, he saved his place in the NFL. He preserved himself a job somewhere at some point because of the way they played the last couple of weeks. But we don't need to get into Adam Gase. It's about Robert Saleh, and then how that hiring affects, of course, the question in all Jets fans' mind, where are they going with the number 2 overall pick? And I don't know if this hiring answers it, but we'll see. That's the next step.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure Saleh is going to have a lot of conversations with Joe Douglas. They're going to sit down, because that was, the first thing was getting a head coach, and they got that done. And I think they did a good job. But now they have to focus on this Sam Darnold situation, number 2 position in the draft. Obviously not so sure what to do. Either way, this Jets team has a long way to go, like I said. So I feel like you can't really do wrong in this situation. I mean, I don't think there's a quarterback out there after Trevor Lawrence that's worthy of being taken in that number 2 spot. I mean, that's just my opinion. I'm not sure how the Jets feel. But overall, there's so much to work with here for the Jets. I think they could really go any way. I think they should keep Sam Darnold and kind of, either draft an offensive lineman, or maybe trade picks or do something of that nature. We'll see what they do. I'm not so sure. Either way, I think they can't really go wrong. They need help basically everywhere. So.
That's the one positive thing when you're picking number 2 and you have a team that just went 2-14. There are evidently a lot of holes, so you've got a lot of places that you can use that number 2 overall pick. I have always been of the opinion that I just think the time's up for Sam Darnold. The fresh start would be good for everyone involved, could sort of restart the clock. But at the same time, it's not necessarily about who you're getting rid of. It's about who you're bringing in. And if the Jets don't like any of the quarterbacks at number 2, certainly don't take one. I'd be curious how much leash there, or what the outlook would be for Sam Darnold as well if they were to keep him. Would it be sort of a 1-year bridge guy to then they like the draft in 2 years and are bringing someone in that sense? Or is it really we are committed to the long-term future of Sam Darnold? And that's the question that everyone wants answered, and we'll try and break it down a little bit as we go forth into this show and talking about the Jets. NFL coaching carousel in full swing. Urban Meyer going to Jacksonville, Arthur Smith to Atlanta. We'll get to all that with Kelly Bright with the headlines later in this hour after we talk to Craig Carton. But the other big news that breaks yesterday, DJ LeMahieu re-signing with the Yankees, a 6-year deal for $90 million, according to ESPN insider Jeff Passan. Yankees finally get that deal done. They also get another one done. Corey Kluber, 2-time AL Cy Young Award winner, on his way to the Bronx as well. So the Yankees, after so much inactivity, are finally getting into the offseason game, and they bring in 2 pretty big names. Well, they're able to keep one big name and bring in another in Kluber.
Yeah, I mean, I think Yankees fans can certainly relax a little bit now, especially with the DJ LeMahieu sign, because that was the biggest thing they really needed. I think that was probably the priority this offseason for the Yankees, just keeping him and at least keeping the same team you had last year, or very similar, going into next season. And normally, I think, a 6-year deal, $90 million, it surprised me a little bit, and we'll get into all that, but 32 years old, 6 years, I would initially with most players say, well, how is he going to be on the back end of his career? But I think with DJ, he's a guy built to play when he's older. He's more of a contact hitter, even though he did show a lot of power last season. And he gets forgotten. He's one of the best hitters on this Yankees team. I mean, he won the batting title last year. And I think he kind of, for someone that good, he kind of almost goes underrated a little bit in that instance. So it was huge that they could sign him. The Corey Kluber signing, on the other hand, I'm a little bit more skeptical about. I mean, he's had certainly potential in the past, obviously 2 Cy Youngs, taking a team to the World Series, but then he also has some recent injuries and stuff that have kept him sidelined for a really long time. So that signing is interesting. I'm not so sure if he can be all that the Yankees hope he can be, which I assume would be a number 2 or a number 3 guy in the starting rotation behind Garrett Cole. I don't know if he can be that guy. I think the potential is there. He's shown it in the past. I'm not so positive if he can do it here. We'll see.
Yankees are hoping they can get some semblance of that guy that won 2 AL Cy Young Awards. Of course, only pitched 1 inning in his lone year with the Texas Rangers in 2020, blew out his shoulder, had shoulder surgery. Yankees training staff was working with him in the offseason, so clearly they have sort of deemed him as a guy who can be a reclamation project. They feel like health-wise he's probably ready to go. I think if they can get him going as a top flight starter, or certainly something close to that, they will be very happy with that signing and feel like their rotation is in a really good place. That's the question for the Yankees to me at this point. They've gotten DJ LeMahieu back in the building. Their lineup for the most part is set. They may make a couple of smaller moves, but now it's about the pitching. Would they add another bullpen arm at some juncture? But certainly the starting rotation, Luis Severino will be back midseason, but until then, you're working with a lot of young guys and guys who maybe aren't as proven. I think they're high on Davy Garcia. I think they like what they've seen from Jordan Montgomery, but it's about filling out this rotation. Could James Paxton at some point return as well? That being a question. Or what does free agency as a whole look like? Could they even be in play for Trevor Bauer? I don't expect that, but the Yankees trying to make sure that they've got a handle on their starting rotation. We will get to all of that and more throughout the next 3 hours right here on One-on-One. First, Sam and I sit down with Craig Carton of WFAN asking all things New York sports. One-on-One this Saturday. Stay with us. Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. One-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. We have the co-host of Carton and Roberts alongside Evan Roberts, heard weekdays from 2 to 7 on WFAN. You can follow him on Twitter at Craig Carton Live. Craig Carton, thanks so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Great. Good to see you guys. Glad there's going to be a future of sports broadcasters out there. If you guys can wait about 25 years to take my job, that'll be great. But good to see that you guys are rocking and rolling.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. I want to get right into the Jets head coaching search. They have interviewed a wide net of candidates. Is there someone that you feel like, in looking at the scope of this job, would be a good person to take over for Gang Green?
Well, if you accept for the record that the Jets will probably mess it up, no matter who they take. As a Jet fan, I don't know. I mean, it's always coordinators and, guys that are all of a sudden being well thought of. And then, of course, you're going to have guys like Doug Peterson who've been there and, done and won in other places. I like going kind of off the radar. I would prefer to hire a young, aggressive type of coach And I don't care if he's had head coaching experience or not. It's, we make a big deal about, oh, has he ever done it before? You either know football and you know how to coach men, or you don't. And I don't need a guy that's been there, around the block 50 times. So I don't have a name for you. I'm a fan of Lane Kiffin. Everyone makes fun of me for that. But you go get a guy that's young and aggressive, and I'll roll the dice with that guy. I don't care what his name is, but it'll probably happen in the next few weeks, I imagine. They're interviewing every single guy with a pulse. So, I think they're leaning towards Doug Peterson because Joe Douglas knows him, obviously. The guy did win a Super Bowl, but he's not going to make me moist. I'm not going to run out, up and down, the street. I'm not going to put on a Speedo and walk across the bridge because I got Doug Peterson. I can tell you that.
So like you said, Craig, I mean, they've interviewed everyone. It seems like 9 coaches the Jets have publicly announced that they've interviewed so far. And it seems like they're going to even interview some more here just in the first round. It's going to take a little bit of time here. Do you think it's a good approach to kind of cast a wide net as they're looking for a new coach here?
Yeah, I mean, unless they had a guy they wanted from Jump Street, there's a lot of guys out there that you don't know who they are until you interview them. The interview process is what gets guys jobs. They all know football, clearly. They've all been coordinators. So now what makes the difference? And it's the interview. And these days, because of Zoom, it's harder to impress someone during an interview. But it's going to come down to either the interview or relationships. That's what it always comes down to.
I want to ask about the Jets quarterback situation too, Sam.
Darnold,
potentially something else. If you're in that position, what are you doing with the number 2 overall pick? Is it Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, an offensive lineman build around Darnold? What are you doing?
Well, it's not Justin Fields, I can tell you that. I would like to know what I can get for it. If you tell me I'm going to get 5 or 6 picks, I'd probably consider trading it. But Justin Fields is not the answer for me. I think he showed that again last night. I want to make the most out of the pick. And if that means getting the offensive lineman that's going to protect my quarterback, I got no problem with it. If it's getting Devontae Smith, who should be a game-breaking wide receiver, great. But I got to build now. It's time to build. We got to treat it like Bob the Builder. We got to build a team. I don't know if Sam Darnold sucks or not. He's got no one around him. So I got another year before I got to pay him. Let's build something. And once you put in the pieces that you need for any team to be successful, like Pat Mahomes is a great quarterback. Guess what? They can run the ball. He is a game-breaking wide receiver and a good offensive line. Put Patrick Mahomes on the Jets. He's not the MVP. And I think people make that mistake a lot. They put it on one guy. And it's not a one-guy sport. It's not tennis. It's not a goalie in hockey that can carry a team throughout a playoff run. It's different, and I think you have to treat it as such.
Switching over to baseball here. I mean, we're going to talk about, obviously, we've talked a lot about the Mets. Everyone has Francisco Lindor, the big move. Are there any other moves out there for them to be made? Maybe George Springer. What do you think about that?
I think George Springer's overrated. Period. Stop. Guy's going to bat 260 here. And his glove's not that much better than Nimmo's. So I wouldn't go out and give George Springer $100 million, but it's also not my money, so it doesn't matter. I think the New York Mets, every year it's like, oh, this is our year, this is our year, this is our year. Oh, we just need one more arm or whatever it might be. Lindor is a game changer. He's just a flat-out game changer. The minute he puts on his jersey, he's the best shortstop the Mets have ever had. So, go with that. If you want to go get me another relief pitcher, great. I don't think they're going to get Trevor Bauer. I don't think they want to spend that kind of money. And I think he's got the capability of being a train wreck here. So I think they'll add another relief pitcher. And then I think the Mets are what they are. And that should be good enough to make the postseason. And then, who the hell knows?
For the Yankees, it's been a quiet offseason, and it seems to be hinging on DJ LeMahieu. What have you made from both sides and sort of the back and forth and the way that reportedly those two have handled the situation? LeMahieu wanting more money, perhaps a larger number of years, and potentially looking elsewhere and seeing what.
Yeah, so you should look. It's like the Yankees said, go look. The Yankees have been very clear and honest with him. If there's a better offer out there, go get it. So why should the Yankees negotiate against themselves? And that's what people want them to do. So, for example, I said this yesterday. Let's say the Yankees offered him 4 years, $80 million. That's $20 million a year. He wants to hit $100 million. He wants a fifth year. All right, first off, is anyone out there offering him 5 years? If someone was, we'd know it because he would have signed the deal or the Yankees would have matched it and he'd be signed to the Yankees. So let's just, based on that, agree that he has not been offered a 5-year deal yet. So if the Yankees have 4 years, $80 million on the table, and no one else has offered him a fifth year or more money, why should the Yankees make him another offer? Like, it's still business at the end of the day, right? So if he can get another offer for more money and or more years, great. The Yankees will match it or beat it. There's no doubt in my mind he's going to be a New York Yankee. And I think what he's upset about is that this current market sucks for the player. It's not like past years where he's going to get 5 offers and guys are throwing buckets of money at him. Number one, all teams lost a lot of money, including the Yankees. There's no guarantee the season starts on time this year. So it's going to be another financial bath for them. So we made you an offer. If you can get a better offer, let us know. We'll beat it. But he hasn't done that yet. So it's not the Yankees' fault. It's the fact that no other team wants to give him 5 years or more money. And when they do, he'll get signed.
So if, like you said, Craig, if the Yankees do sign DJ LeMahieu, how confident are you in that team as it is very similar to last year in terms of roster construction?
They'll win 95 plus games. They'll be in the playoffs and they'll do what the Yankees always do, save New York. And that's what they do. We should all wear wristbands. Thank God for the Yankees, because without the New York Yankees, New York sucks when it comes to pro sports and has for over a decade. You have one playoff game in a decade at MetLife Stadium. The New York Mets, yes, 2015 went to a World Series. What else do they have? Basketball blows. Hockey nobody cares about. And we all pick on the Yankees. Oh, the Yankees didn't sign LeMahieu. If we don't have the New York Yankees, we might as well just be like, we're like Detroit or Cleveland of the East Coast. Like we overstate, we're New Yorkers. We love New York, and I do, and I'm from here. And I love New York, and we are better than everybody else. But sports-wise, we suck. And we got to take ownership of sucking. Like, we suck. Fordham sucks. St. John sucks. Seton Hall sucks. Rutgers sucks. And the pro teams suck. If you guys didn't have a White Castle and the zoo, I'd never go to Fordham. And I coached the purple and white basketball game a few years ago.
Wow. Is there a move, though, seriously, that you feel like the Yankees should make or need to make to improve the roster, maybe outside of LeMahieu? Because I know that there's a confidence that they will win 95 games, but it's hard to ignore that the expectation here, not having won a championship since 2009, this is a team that's ready to win right now. And for a fan base that says we got to get there at some point.
Oh, no, they haven't won a championship since 2009. And we view that as they're really letting us down. They've been in the playoffs almost every year since 2009, virtually. To answer your question, listen, they got to get LeMahieu done, obviously. There are some rumors out there that maybe they would take a look at Arenado, which would be interesting. I don't think they will. And I think you re-sign Tanaka. And I think, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that's really the message to Yankee fans. It's not broke. So what are we worried about? Like, you still have the core group of guys that, wins 100 games, over 95 games virtually every year, at least since Aaron Boone's been the manager, right? So what's so broken about the New York Yankees? I don't think there anything is. Evan Roberts is here. Hi, Evan.
Switching to basketball here, we've done enough talk about the Yankees, I think. So obviously, the New York Knicks' opinions on that team versus the Brooklyn Nets is quite different, despite the fact that record-wise they're very similar.
Because the Nets have more talent. I mean, as much as I'm a diehard Knicks fan, you can't dispute the fact that just on paper, guy to guy, the Brooklyn Nets are a far more talented team than the New York Knicks. Now, you can't account for heart. You can't account for hustle and defense and all that stuff. But I'd be silly if I told you that the Knicks are a better team. They're not. The Nets are a better team.
Yeah, and that's basically my question. Are you concerned with the Nets because of that basic?
No, I don't like the Nets, so I'm not concerned about them at all. I don't lose any sleep over the train wreck that Kyrie Irving has become, or the load management crap, or the fact that Steve Nash has already proven he's a tough time learning how to coach on the fly. But I don't spend any time worrying about the Brooklyn Nets. I don't care about the Nets. I have no interest in the Nets other than the fact that they play New York, and tomorrow they play against my Knicks, and I'll pay attention to that because I'm a Knicks fan. And you can wake me up in June, and if they figured it out and they're making a run for a championship, for sure, as a sports talk show host, we'll pay attention to that and talk about it. But outside of that, I don't care what the Nets do. They're irrelevant to me and most New Yorkers.
Talking to Craig Carton here on One-on-One. So let's talk about your Knicks. They've turned some heads with a 5-6 start to the season. As amazing as that sounds, you're talking about how they've been so poor for so long. What have you liked, or what has been encouraging from Tom Thibodeau and his group, at least in the early going?
Well, listen, they're not a good team, but they compete. They play defense. They're scrappy. They don't have one guy that's a go-to guy. In the 5 games they've won, it's been a different guy, that kind of has been clutch for them. So I like that. But, I do, as much as I'm enthused with their start and the fact that I like how Thibodeau coaches and they're a defensive-minded team, because that's what we love about New York basketball, I have to also temper that with the reality that, they're not going to be very good. They're not going to be a 500 team this year, and I'm okay with that. We're building. It's a building block, and I'm okay with that.
So the Super Wild Card weekend last weekend in the NFL, obviously very exciting to watch. Looking forward to the NFL divisional round. What matchup would you say are you most looking forward to this coming weekend?
Well, listen, you want to see the stars go against the stars, right? You want to see Breeze and Brady. I want to see what Aaron Rodgers does. I want to see Mahomes. I want to see Baker Mayfield. It's a star-driven, league, as all sports are. I want to see the stars in the big spot. And I think we're going to get that. You've got some great quarterbacks. You probably have Cleveland's probably got the best running attack. Kansas City is the most entertaining team to watch. So you hope that from this point on, the great players play great. I have no rooting interest in any team. I don't have a dog in the fight. I want great players to play great. I want Ajita. I want, 5 minutes to go, down by 3, you got the ball. That's the one thing we didn't get in Super Wild Card weekend. There wasn't a single come from behind win in the final few minutes of the game. It didn't happen. I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see a team with the ball. I guess Indianapolis came close, but they had the worst 2-minute drill I've ever seen in my life. So I'd like to see the last 5 minutes of a game and a play gets made to win or lose the game. That'd be great.
Craig, I'll get you out of here on this one. Is there a team that you really like in this divisional round, or maybe a team that we're not paying enough attention to in the scope of the NFL playoffs that you think can make a run at the Super Bowl here?
Yeah, the Cleveland Browns. Everyone's got them as, they can't beat Kansas City. Why not? They run the ball really, really well, better than anybody. And lately, Baker Mayfield has been playing spot on. They're not taking big risks down the field either. So from that standpoint, I think Cleveland is a team that absolutely could win the Super Bowl this year.
He is the co-host of Carton and Roberts alongside Evan Roberts, heard weekdays from 2 to 7 p.m. on WFAN. You can follow him on Twitter at Craig Carton Live. Craig, thanks so much for doing this.
You got it, guys. Good luck to you, and stay in touch for sure. And keep making tapes, keep recording yourselves, and keep practicing so you figure out what ultimately you're good at and what you should do. And I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thanks so much.
All right, boys, be good.
We'll be back with more one-on-one right after this.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One. I'm Kelly Bright, and I'm here with Nick and Sam for our first headline segment of the day. And like Sam and Nick said earlier, it's been a huge week in sports news, a lot coming at us. But first and foremost, the annual NFL head coach carousel is back in business. 7 different teams, Jaguars, Lions, Jets, Chargers, Texans, Falcons, and most recently the Philadelphia Eagles are expected to start next season with a new head coach. 3 of those teams already making some pretty big headlines with those decisions. Robert Saleh to the Jets on a 5-year agreement. We've got Urban Meyer to Jacksonville with his first position in the NFL, and then Arthur Smith going to Atlanta. So, Nick, I'm going to start with you. You guys obviously touched on this a little bit before, but Robert Saleh to the Jets, coming from San Francisco as the 49ers defensive coordinator, how are you feeling about this move?
I think it was one of the best that they could have made in their position of having a sort of difficult job to undertake, right? When you look at the Jets, it is not positioned in the greatest of places, particularly when you look at the division that they are in, but also some of the stuff that's gone on. And then you've got the media and all the stuff that are some of the drawbacks that come into taking the job with the Jets. I mean, I think that their management is headed in the right direction. Joe Douglas has done a good job. Ownership is a little bit shaky for sure, right? That has not been somewhere where the Jets have certainly checked all their boxes. But to me, when I look at this job, it's going to come down to dealing with what's in the division. And that's, to me, where I'm a little bit skeptical of not only, and this is not a Robert Saleh thing, this is anyone who they hire and comes in. Because Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills are playing outstanding this season, 13-3 record. They got to find someone at the quarterback position who can help them compete with Josh Allen and the Bills. And then, okay, well, Miami and Tua, you're wondering how he's going to develop. There are question marks, but again, coming into the draft, we've seen jumps that quarterbacks can take in year 2 and year 3. Just got done talking about Josh Allen. So what is that going to look like in the same division with a coach that I think a lot of people think has done a really good job, and Miami's picking 3rd overall, and they'll have a lot at their disposal. And then the other team in your division, who everyone is sort of writing off right now, is coached and run by the consensus greatest coach of all time. So they are in a really difficult spot. Now they have cap space, they have draft picks, and Joe Douglas, I think, has proven that he's done a decent job. You look at the draft that he's done and made, the draft picks he made this year. I think a lot of people are encouraged and like what they've seen. To me, it's going to come down to finding the quarterback, and that's really all that that's all it is. That's what the NFL is about at times, and I'm confident Robert Saleh is going to come in and potentially change the culture, bring a new energy and a new attitude to what the Jets are doing. At the end of the day, player buy-in is about winning. And that's what it comes down to. So I'm interested to see how it goes. I think it's a good hire for the Jets. At the same time, they got to find a way to figure out that quarterback situation. And in this division in particular, I think it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it earlier, Nick, but I feel like the Jets, with this decision, they really needed to nail it, especially coming from their past with Gase and with Bowles. This was a really important first decision. I mean, you talked about everything that needs to be done after that, and that's a lot, especially in that division. But this decision, I really liked it because they finally got one right here. I feel like obviously we can only say so much because he hasn't really done much yet. All we can say is that he's a good fit for the organization, and he looks like he's going to help change the culture, as you talked about, a different attitude, upbeat, more energetic. Certainly a little bit of a contrast from Adam Gase, which I think will help this organization and kind of transfer from a losing culture of the past to maybe a little bit more of a winning culture in the future. Maybe not immediately. Obviously, there's quite a lot of time to go and a number of years for them to develop. But right now, I really think he's a great fit for this organization. We're not so sure. I want to warn Jets fans from getting too excited too early because we haven't seen him on the field, and we don't know what he's going to do with the Sam Darnold situation. We don't know how he's going to handle the uphill battle that he's been placed in. But I think he's up for the task. He seems up for the challenge. By just taking this job, you're up for that challenge. So I would trust a lot, and I would trust what he's going to plan on doing. And I think the biggest thing and the most exciting thing for Jets fans and for this organization as a whole is the winning culture and the different attitude that he's going to bring to this organization that I think will help them in the long run.
Yeah, Sam, I think you hit the nail on the head there. This is a Jets organization that just finished 2-14 for their 5th straight losing season, 10th one out of the playoffs. You need a change, and it can't it starts with the head coach. Players who were interviewed after their final game, all of them were talking about a lack of identity and a lack of a winning mindset. And here you bring in this guy who, like you said, has a lot of energy. He's very positive. He's intense. He's basically everything that Adam Gase wasn't. And I think he can really come in here and give them a culture shock. And I mean that in the best way possible. He can really change the mindset for some of these players and get some of the players to buy in better than they have, in the previous few seasons. And there I feel like there are some questions because he is such a defensive minded coach. You've seen what he went in there and did with San Francisco, taking them from one of the worst ranked defenses in the league to a top 5 in the past 2 seasons in just a few years. So defensively, there's no questions. And then if you're looking at the difficult quarterback situation that he's going to come in and deal with, he's had an upbringing under some of the best offensive minds in the league, Pete Carroll, Kyle Shanahan. So he can take some of the lessons that he learned under some of those better coaches and hopefully apply that to, dealing with this kind of confusing situation with the quarterback situation there. And, there is talk of him bringing in Mike LaFleur, and that should hopefully make an impact. I don't know, Nick, if you want to touch on that a little bit more. Obviously he was on Kyle Shanahan's staff with the Niners as well, and they've been successful. So maybe it goes beyond just bringing in a head coach, but also, what decisions Joe Douglas and the rest of the front office make going forward with the rest of the coaching staff.
Sure, that's crucial. He's the Mike LaFleur, that is the San Francisco passing game coordinator. So they split between run and pass game coordinator, Kyle Shanahan calling the plays in San Francisco. And the consensus around the league is that he's a really good coach. He's the brother of Matt LaFleur, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers right now. And he was somebody who I think a lot of people are high on potentially in the next couple of years to have a head coaching job himself, with the way that the propensity for teams to have that rapid ascension for those younger offensive minded coaches who can really come in and turn around their quarterbacks. So that's to me what it comes down to. And I think that's if that's true. Again, there's nothing that's confirmed because technically Robert Saleh is not officially been hired by the team as of yet. They have an agreement in principle, so he'll get his staff together. It's obviously happening. He's not Josh McDaniels, but the point is you'll see what LaFleur is about early on. And I think that Jets fans are going to be happy with that Kyle Shanahan style of offense in a guy who has been really instrumental in working with a number of quarterbacks. That said, Mike LaFleur is not Kyle Shanahan. If he was bringing in Kyle Shanahan, you would feel like, oh my goodness, now you've got that sort of opportunity reclamation project with your quarterback. But to me, that's what it comes down to. And it's a tough bar to clear, because the quarterback play does not just have to be serviceable. It does not have to be good. It has to be great, because when you look at their division and the conference, that's what they need to do to be successful. It's not having a middle of the road quarterback to make this thing work. A sort of, okay, well, we feel like Sam Darnold's at a place where he can be competent, or he can turn into a Jimmy Garoppolo, and we feel like, all right, well, he's not a total loss. No, that's not what's going to win in this AFC with the landscape of really, really good young quarterbacks. He's got to elevate, whether it be with Sam Darnold or finding someone else who can elevate to the level of a Josh Allen, of a Lamar Jackson, of a Patrick Mahomes. That's Justin Herbert. That's what is going to win in this AFC right now. So that to me is the biggest thing. I've got limited questions about Robert Saleh and the job that he's going to do as a head coach. But at the end of the day, even Bill Belichick has proven that without a quarterback this year, you can't win. So Belichick, I'm sure, put together great game plans and did enough against the teams that also had the middle of the road quarterbacks and did what he could do. But at the end of the day, when Cam Newton is playing quarterback for you this year, you're not successful. The Jets need to find the quarterback. And forgive me if I'm sort of going away from the initial reaction of Robert Saleh, but as much as we don't know about him, what we do know is that he won't be successful if he doesn't have a quarterback, and one that can play at times at an elite level. I don't know if Sam Darnold's that guy. I don't know if they can find someone elsewhere. I don't know if he's in the draft, but that's what it is. It doesn't matter what Robert Saleh does. He can change the culture. The culture can only change so much without winning, and to win, you need to ace that quarterback situation, with which the Jets have not done perhaps since Joe Namath.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on that briefly, I agree with you. I think we're talking about a winning culture here, and we're talking about changing all that. Yeah, it starts with winning football games,
right?
And that might be, a few years down the road for the Jets. And I'm not so sure if Sam Darnold is the permanent answer for that. I don't think he is, but right now, Salah's got just a lot on his plate and a lot to think about with Joe Douglas here. So it's going to be a few years. But the good news is they have some cap space, they have some draft picks. So we'll see what they do with that. And I think Salah, there's no doubt he's a good fit on the field with this team. And I'm sure LaFleur will be a good fit as well. I trust in his judgment to take someone like that, who's been highly regarded across the league by Shanahan also. So I trust that. But I think there's a long road ahead, and it starts with what they do here in the NFL draft upcoming.
Yeah, Sam, and you mentioned winning culture, and one coach who's had lots of experience winning, but at a college level, is Urban Meyer, and he's making his NFL debut in Jacksonville. Owner Shad Khan, has been in interviews and conversations with him for a while, and they're just recently making that official. Obviously, he's been at Ohio State since 2012 with an 83-9 record in 7 years. He actually originally became a household name in Florida before that, leading the Gators to a 65-15 record and obviously 2 national titles. So he's almost a hometown guy going back to Florida. So that's pretty exciting. But Sam, I'll go back to you. Is it kind of questionable that he hasn't coached in the NFL? Is that going to be too much of a jump? Or do we think that his success in college is going to be enough for him to be successful at the next level?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super hard question to answer, because when you look at college coaches making that jump to the professional level, it's always a little risky, and you're always going to get that argument of, well, is he ready and capable of coaching at the professional level after, being in college for so long? But I mean, like you were listing off some of his accomplishments, I don't think those can go unnoticed no matter where he's coaching. I mean, he has had unbelievable success. He was 22-2 at Utah before winning national championships twice with Florida and then with Ohio State. That's a lot, and that's a really good resume. If you're going to hire a college coach, if you're the Jaguars, I think this is your guy. I mean, like you said, he spent plenty of time in Florida. He likes being there. There are reports that he was honestly sick of the college game and wanted to make this jump to the professionals. And obviously that's true because he's here with the Jaguars. So he wants to be there. The Jaguars really want him there. And you can say what you want about college, but if you're going to hire a college coach, I mean, there's certainly other pro options out there. So you can't say this was the only decision for the Jaguars. But if you're going to take a little bit of risk and hire a college coach and have to hire a guy who's had no professional experience, I think this is your guy. And they seem to have their heart set on Urban Meyer. So obviously, I can't predict the future. I'm not so sure how he's going to be with this team. But the fact that you're going to be starting with the number 1 pick and probably Trevor Lawrence, to build your franchise around. He's a franchise quarterback. The highest number of cap space. We talked about cap space with the Jets, and with the Jaguars, they have the highest number of any NFL team. So that's something to build around too. There's certainly, I think those 2 things were very appealing for Urban Meyer. And I mean, I hope they get this right. I hope they get this right, but I can't predict the future. So we'll see.
Initially, when I see this flash across my phone screen on Twitter, I was skeptical. I said, it's always tough for some of these coaches and these guys who have sort of tried this transition, and it's worked for some, it hasn't. And Urban Meyer's a guy who's been in college for so long. The one thing I forgot is that Urban Meyer is a great coach. And that, to me, translates no matter where you're at. And, of course, it's going to be an adjustment. And, of course, he's going to need to figure out, to me, his health situation. That's what sort of strikes me, because he is someone who reportedly had a lot of issue with losing. And not that I'm hoping that my head coach comes in and really loves to lose, but the point is that one game was really putting him in a spot where he just was not in a good state of mind. And I think that if he is inconsistent in that way, that will be problematic for his players. At the same time, the way he sort of explained it was, well, one loss sort of ended our season when he was in college, whereas now you can lose 4, 5, 6, and you still have an opportunity to go and win the Super Bowl if you have a successful season and make the playoffs. So that, to me, is the biggest thing. Is he going to be healthy? Is he up for the job? He mentioned that in 2014 he had a surgery, and that sort of helped things for him and sort of calmed things down. So I'm interested. I'm fascinated to see how that whole thing shakes out, because I think Urban Meyer's a great coach. He has mentioned it time and time again in the initial comments that he's made in Jacksonville about hiring a great staff. I think that's going to be crucial for him. What does his offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator look like to just help him make that transition? And there's reports that it's going to be Scott Linehan as his offensive coordinator, or at least interviewing for the job. That one, certainly a guy who's experienced, didn't work out at LSU and didn't work out terribly well in Dallas, and their offense had sort of seemed to go to the next level when Kellen Moore took over. So we'll see how that goes. But I just really think that at the end of the day, you can coach. And you see at some points, college coaches come in and they're not able to read the situation. They're not able to read the room. Like, that's what it struck me when Chip Kelly went to Philadelphia, right? He was a guy who thought he was going to come in and run the show and just do all this stuff and have all the control and tell all the players what to do, this, that, and whatever. Urban Meyer's not that guy. Urban Meyer is one of the smartest coaches that I've ever seen. I mean, the way the guy is able to understand, relate to players, and do things. I just think that if there was ever any coach who was going to make a transition from college to the pros and be successful, it's Urban Meyer. He's coached I think it's 57 players who are in the NFL right now. So he's coached a full NFL roster at one point or another at Ohio State, Florida, and other stops. So I'm confident in Urban Meyer, and I think that he's going to do a good job. And again, as we were just talking about with the Jets, he's got the quarterback situation figured out. If Trevor Lawrence is a home run, Urban Meyer will be too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, he's been able to win no matter what program he's in. He's in an exclusive group of coaches who have won a national championship at multiple schools. The other member of that group is Nick Saban, who flopped when he had his opportunity in the NFL with the Dolphins. But hopefully this situation goes better for Urban Meyer. Like you said, he's had experience working with NFL caliber talent. Former number 1 overall pick Alex Smith, Ezekiel Elliott played under him, Nick and Joey Bosa both at Ohio State. So, he's had that experience working and developing strong players. And another coach who has kind of gotten his recognition from the way that he went in to the Tennessee Titans and just changed their offense completely and really brought the most out of Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry is Arthur Smith. And now he is going to find his way to Atlanta, with Matt Ryan. Do you think he will be as successful in getting the most out of his offense in Atlanta as he was with Tennessee? And Sam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, it's a lot to ask. But if you look at his track record, like we talked about with Urban Meyer, looking at Arthur Smith and what he's done with this Tennessee Titans offense, it's also very impressive. And it's not just with Derrick Henry, who's obviously a very good talent. So you can't give all the credit to Arthur Smith for what Derrick Henry does on a week in and week out basis, but also Ryan Tannehill, who struggled a lot in Miami. And he was kind of able to unlock him and figure him out. And Tannehill's had a couple good years for the Titans. And something has to be said here about Arthur Smith, who actually attracted requests for interviews from all 7 of the head coaching vacancies out there. And that's a huge thing, because it shows that people around this league, not just the Atlanta Falcons, all around the league, trust Arthur Smith. And they trust him as a future head coach. So that's something huge to be said about that. He's got a lot of star power to work with Julio Jones and Matt Ryan. I'm excited to see what he does with that. He's an offensive-minded guy, so that'll be fun to watch. And overall, I think it's another good hire. For sure.
Yeah, Arthur Smith is a guy that kind of reminds me of Kevin Stefanski, who came over from Minnesota and then ended up in Cleveland this year, and how well it's gone for the Cleveland Browns, ending the playoff drought and getting a big win over the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're playing this weekend. We'll get to all that later. But Kevin Stefanski was a guy who spent a lot of time in Minnesota, multiple staffs, and just sort of worked his way up there, every facet of the organization, found his way in, worked his way up to offensive coordinator, then finally gets his shot in Cleveland. And Arthur Smith is largely that same way. Was in Tennessee a long time, multiple staffs, worked his way up, was a tight ends coach a couple of years ago, and then eventually makes his way to offensive coordinator and is really successful. I think that it pays to have a really intimate understanding of multiple positions in the organization, right? You know, not only I was an offensive coordinator, and you don't necessarily get the perspective of working other places, but I know what it's like to be the tight ends coach, to be somebody who works to just, get my foot in the door here in Tennessee. So I really like what he's done with the Tennessee offense. There's a lot made of Adam Gase and Tannehill leaving him. Well, how about the credit that should go to Arthur Smith for helping develop Ryan Tannehill into a guy that we now say, well, Adam Gase stinks and he made a bunch of mistakes. So I think there's a lot of credit that needs to go there as well. So I like this hire. I think it's going to be something that's, again, determined by the quarterback situation. What are they going to do with Matt Ryan? They got the number 4 overall pick. Could they potentially be in the market for a rookie quarterback?
Yeah, definitely. And Matt Ryan, he led the NFL in completions in each of the past 2 seasons. But, you look at the way that Smith has run the offense in Tennessee, they use the run play a lot. Titans ranked in the top 4 in run play percentage in each of the last 2 seasons, while the Falcons were last in 2019 and 25th in 2020. So I think there's going to be a huge shift in the balance of play calling there. And I think you could argue that will help out Matt Ryan. He is getting a little bit older. If you take off some of the pressure on him, some of just that load management that he's had to deal with, leading that offense so strongly. But at the same time, Matt Ryan is significantly ahead of where Ryan Tannehill was when Arthur Smith took over and started working with him. So you got to imagine that the ceiling is pretty high. The potential there is pretty significant with what Arthur Smith can do for that Falcons team that has pretty much just, been on that bubble, been on that line, waiting for something to move the needle. So hopefully this coaching decision is able to do just that, especially if they're able to find some running back, maybe fingers crossed, someone like Najee Harris, they can pick up in the second round of the draft. So if they can get a running back in there to work with Matt Ryan and to complete, the kind of offense that Arthur Smith has become so known for, I think the Falcons could see one of their best seasons potentially next year.
I'm with you. I think that there's certainly a setup there that can breed success. It's all about that quarterback situation. I keep telling you guys that. That'll do it for our first headline segment. We'll, on the other side of this break, get to some more Jets talk. Robert Saleh, Yankees locking up LeMahieu and Kluber, Jon Helmkamp, Deadspin, Nets, Jets, and more as we continue. One-on-one rolls on this Saturday night. Stay with us. To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, 11:57, as we take you up till 2 a.m. on the East Coast. Nick DeLucas, Sam Davis, Kelly Bright with the headlines. Alex Wool's doing an excellent job, as always, with the production here. Sam, let's dive further into the Jets. They ink Robert Saleh to a 5-year deal, 20th coach in franchise history. Former 49ers DC at a top 10 defense in total yardage, passing and rushing, second in the NFL in total defense. Mike LaFleur, passing game coordinator, will be on his way to New York as well. And with the number 2 pick and everything that comes with that, Adam Schefter hinting at the idea that they may not be using the number 2 overall pick on a quarterback. So Saleh is in, and he will have, with Joe Douglas, a number of decisions to make. The thing that sort of I want to start with is what do you think the hiring of Saleh means for the outlook on the number 2 overall pick?
Well, I mean, you mentioned how Adam Schefter hinted about keeping Sam Darnold, and I think for sure Saleh is going to have a lot of conversations with Joe Douglas. It's not just going to be Robert Saleh's decision. You know, Joe Douglas will play an important role in that decision as well. Personally, I'm going to disagree with you, Nick, and I think they should keep Sam Darnold, and I think they should give him another chance of another year with a good coach in Saleh, who I think we all, as Jets fans in general, everyone trusts that Saleh is going to be that good coach, that better coach, and then Mike LaFleur offensively, I think, will help guide Sam Darnold as well. But you can't overlook the numbers from last season, from this past year: 9 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Just plain terrible. There's no way around it. You certainly can't overlook that. That's something to think about. But for me, this decision comes mostly down to the fact that I just can't trust taking a quarterback as high as number 2 in this draft. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence, the Jaguars hope that he's going to be a franchise quarterback to build around. But outside of that, you have Justin Fields, who from Ohio State has certainly looked very good at times. I think back to that semifinal against Clemson. He looked amazing. But then I look at him in the national championship against a good Alabama team, and he looked subpar. He didn't look great. And there's certainly other games mixed in there throughout the year that he hasn't looked great either. So he's been very inconsistent. Not a guy I trust enough to take at number 2. And then you look at Zach Wilson at BYU, another example of a quarterback up there. I like him better than Fields, but I still don't like him enough, or I guess trust him enough to take him as a second overall pick. And for me, I think the Jets have a couple different options with that pick. If they decide to keep Sam Darnold, which obviously I'm not the one making the decision, but if that's the decision they decide to make, they can go towards the offensive lineman route, which they certainly need help in. And there's certainly guys available to either take at number 2, or they can decide to, trade picks and go down. And if a team really wants a quarterback or wants someone at that number 2 spot, I'm sure they can find someone willing to take that number 2 position, because they also have a draft pick, I believe 23rd in the first round as well. So that's something to think about too. If the Jets can trade down, still get 2 picks in the first round, and set themselves up a little better, give Sam Darnold another chance, at least a year. I think that leash is going to be short if they do decide to give him another chance, because he's had 3 years. So what can you say? They're going to give him another chance, I think, though. But this is a very difficult and tough decision that you have to think Robert Saleh knew was coming when he decided to take this job. This is something that he's probably already thought about. Him and Joe Douglas are going to think about it even more, and I'm sure they'll come to the best decision for this organization.
Well, I'm sure that Robert Saleh didn't walk into the Jets blind and say, hey, I can just change the culture and win. And I'm sure that he thinks about a number of the things that I've sort of been alluding to and hinting at throughout the show about you got to figure out the quarterback situation. I have always been of the opinion that the Jets just need to move on. And it's not that Sam Darnold can't play or that he couldn't potentially be successful somewhere else. But I just think that for both parties involved, it's best to move on. I just don't see it happening in New York, 1. And 2, I think that he is someone who has kind of shown over the last couple of years, I'm not saying he can't get his career back on track, but him being an elite of the elite quarterback, I think has sort of come and gone. That's the way I feel about it. And at some point, as much as Adam Gase has not been of help and of service to him, you can still find ways to be successful, and he really hasn't done that. So I'm not saying that it's over for him. I think in the right situation, I think Indianapolis would be an outstanding place for him. I think somewhere where he could succeed, and their roster's really good right now with a couple other pieces around him, a wide receiver. They might be even able to contend for a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. I don't know, but I just don't feel like he's a guy who you can insert and say, all right, we don't need to put a ton around him. He's going to carry us on his back. I don't see Sam Darnold being that guy. So at that point, that long-term you want to move on. Now, I agree with you insofar as if there's not that guy at number 2, you can keep him. There's no reason to just get rid of Sam Darnold for the sake of getting rid of Sam Darnold, and then you turn around and say, all right, well, we don't know what we're going to do at quarterback. We're going to play Joe Flacco for a year? No, I mean, they're not going to do that. What intrigues me, or what was interesting to me, is Jimmy Garoppolo is a free agent, right? So would the Jets, with LaFleur coming in and Saleh as the head coach now, consider bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo as sort of a bridge guy? And you have the cap space certainly to do that, although I don't know how they would feel about bringing him in, and as opposed to using the money elsewhere if he's not going to be a long-term answer either. But at the same time, if you feel like he puts you in a better position to win, you certainly can make the argument that that's a route that they could go down. So there are options for them. I do agree with you insofar as, again, you don't want to make the mistake of just, we need a quarterback, we're going to go in and take Fields number 2 because we need to push the reset button. He may not end up being better than Darnold, and you're back to square one, having wasted the second overall pick. So I'm not advocating for that. At the same time, I think that the long-term answer is to move on from him. So the point is, if you don't have a quarterback right now, and we're talking about what they're going to do, at the point where we're talking about what are they going to do, they're looking. So they're looking for a quarterback. I think at some point, long-term answer, they're going to have to move on. So I'm interested to see how it goes, and time will tell. But that's where I'm at with this. I think they got to move on, and then you sort of scope the landscape of what's potentially available. And I guess I gather from you, you're not a big fan of Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, and then at that point, you're looking at the free agent market, right? Or keeping him for a year. So it's as we detailed, it's an uphill battle for Robert Saleh coming in here, and you're trying to figure out how it's going to go. I'll ask it this way, because we didn't really get a ton into Mike LaFleur as the offensive coordinator. And again, that's the reporting that has come to light as of recently, that he's going to be coming with Robert Saleh and heading the offense for the Jets. Are you confident that he is someone, as someone who is a Jets fan here, are you confident that he's going to come in and be a guy who could potentially turn around Sam Darnold? Because I don't know that I think of him necessarily that highly, that he's a guy who's going to come in and, all right, now my quarterback's going to start playing really well.
Yeah, I'm not with you. I mean, I am with you. I'm not super confident in that. I think it's important to note that Sam Darnold, I agree with you. He's not the guy to build around for this franchise at all. And he's kind of, if you could hopefully make him kind of a bridge quarterback, like you said, a guy to kind of separate from the past with Adam Gase and the future of this team being a playoff team, which is years down the road. I'm not even so sure if he can be that. He very well might be. Mike LaFleur could make him into that kind of quarterback, but I'm a little skeptical because, we can bring up the experience thing. That's the one thing people talked about with Robert Saleh as well. He's never been a head coach. Mike LaFleur has never been an offensive coordinator. I mean, he's been a passing game coordinator, and Shanahan really likes him with the 49ers, but he's never had his experience really leading an offense. And the same goes for Robert Saleh, who's never had the experience really leading a team. And Saleh's a defensive-minded kind of guy. So Mike LaFleur, that puts a lot of pressure, I think, on his shoulders to really lead this offense, who obviously Adam Gase did not do a very good job with. And he's got to kind of clean up the scraps. If they decide to keep Sam Darnold, he's going to have to work and develop him, because 9 touchdowns, 11 interceptions isn't going to cut it. And I think that Garoppolo decision would be an interesting one, and something they should definitely consider, because I feel like could be a much better bridge quarterback to kind of separate them from the old Jets and the new Jets. If they really want to have a winning culture, they need a really good quarterback to build around. I don't think Sam Darnold's that. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo's that, to be honest, but at least he's a step in the right direction, I think. And I think LaFleur would obviously be a lot more comfortable with a guy like Garoppolo, who he's already spent a bunch of time around. But my point is this, in terms of the experience thing, if you're going to trust Robert Saleh with no experience as the head coach, and you're going to trust his decisions, which it seems like everyone in the NFL did. I mean, he got plenty of interviews. You have to trust his decision to bring in a guy like Mike LaFleur, and you have to trust that Saleh thinks this guy is best suited for this role. And I think, obviously, we talked about Saleh didn't go into this situation with the with the Jets and not think at all about Sam Darnold. I'm sure he thought a lot about it. I'm sure he thought a lot about the number 2 pick. So he knows, and he's been thinking for a while, if I could guess, about what to do in this situation. So he's got to be thinking, okay, if I'm going to bring in an offensive coordinator, I got to bring in a guy that's suited to deal with this situation wherever we decide to go, whether that be Sam Darnold, whether that be drafting a quarterback, whether that be Jimmy Garoppolo or anyone else in free agency. So that's something you got to think about. I think maybe, I hope at least, he's thought about the fact that LaFleur is going to be taking on this role of developing this offense in a way that is desperately needed, I think.
That's the one difficulty for me with this hire. If there is a negative angle to it, again, Robert Saleh seems to be a guy who's qualified for the job, and the reception has been good. And again, time will tell. It's about winning games on the football field. So he can be as good of a motivator, culture guy as you want. But if he doesn't win games, then the time's going to run out quickly. We've seen time and time again coordinators who haven't been able to make the transition to being head coaches. It is a different role. I'm thinking that for the most part, he can do a good enough job in that area to sort of figure his way out. It's something now that we've seen that the transition's been made a little bit easier for, I think, sort of these first-time head coaches. So that we will see on. But I'm not a huge fan of, again, with where this organization is, the quarterback is so crucial. The number 2 overall pick in this draft is why we're talking about it all the time, because it's so monumental and so big for this organization. And you're bringing in a guy who, let's be honest, is not going to run the offense. So your head coaching hire and the success of it will not necessarily be wholly determined by just Robert Saleh. It's about the staff. And now that goes for a number of places, right? I mean, that's any defensive coach or any offensive coach, right? Your defense, what does it look like? It's incumbent upon that head coach to bring in a quality staff. But at the same time, when it's the pressing issue, when it's question number 1 that you face when you walk in the door, it's really difficult for Robert Saleh to deal with. And it's tough, in my opinion, for the Jets organization to deal with, because now you're not really hiring Robert Saleh. I mean, you are, but you're also putting a ton of stock in Mike LaFleur. And he's someone who you didn't necessarily hire. You sort of signed off on Saleh bringing your guy. And that's not to say that the Jets are going to, if the Jets weren't comfortable with Mike LaFleur, quite frankly, Robert Saleh wouldn't be here. They would say, okay, we got to go in a different direction with our staff. It's just, to me, when you look at the scope of the hire, it's difficult now where you're questioning whether he is going to really determine it. I think that Miami is a great example. Miami and Brian Flores, a lot of people would say, has done an outstanding job in building that thing as quickly as they have with the draft picks that they've hit on. That defense is really good. They're sitting at home playing golf in Miami, watching the playoffs. Why? Because their offense in the quarterback situation, at least in year 1, wasn't good enough. So now it's not about Brian Flores. It's about, okay, well, it was Chad O'Shea in year 1 and now Chan Gailey in year 2, and they're looking for a 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. So it seems very clear to me that their success is being determined not by the dude that they hired to be their head coach, but be their offensive coordinator. So it's a difficult spot to be in, and is a predicament for any team that wants to hire a defensive-minded head coach in that way, that you're really relying on an offensive guy to come in, and we know how important offense is. Time will tell. Hard to say about Mike LaFleur right now, but when you look at it from that angle, I think it's tough for the Jets fans because, yes, you can like Saleh, he can check all the boxes, but it's about the offensive coordinator too.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say this. I think Jets fans in a few years would love to be in the position the Dolphins are in right now. You know, a game away from the playoffs, basically. So obviously they don't have a guy like Tua who they can develop, but still, if they can get that much out of Robert Saleh, then they'll take it. And then they can maybe, if Mike LaFleur doesn't work out, okay, let's look for a new coordinator there. So overall, you got to say, when looking at the big scope of the issue, if Robert Saleh can be a good coach, that's priority number 1. And that's the biggest thing, because he's going to have a huge say in the Sam Darnold and NFL draft situation. So that's, I think, step 1. I hope Mike LaFleur does well. Obviously that's a more, time will tell kind of scenario. And I think worst case, I don't see an issue with going out and looking for another offensive coordinator if Robert Saleh is not the problem. And that's something big to think about. So for the Jets, I just think overall, it's really good news to finally feel like they nailed a hire and got someone who seems to fit well for this position. Everyone seems to like, and he's going to bring a new attitude and all that. We talked about all that. But in terms of getting better and finding a spot at the playoffs, it's going to be a number of years. And Mike LaFleur and Robert Saleh has a big uphill battle to climb here. We'll see what they can do.
We will see. Time will tell. Reception's been pretty good thus far. A lot of work to do ahead of them. Rest of hour 2, Yankees lock up DJ LeMahieu and add Corey Kluber. We talked to Jon Helmkamp of Deadspin about Nets, Jets, and more. One-on-one, stay with us.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM. WFUV.org and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Here on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show as we take you up to 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. Nick DeLuca, Sam Davis, Kelly Bright with the headlines. Alex Wool's doing our production here tonight. Yankees signed DJ LeMahieu to a 6-year, $90 million contract, according to Jeff Passan, after a lengthy negotiation period. Later in the day, they also inked Corey Kluber, a two-time AL Cy Young Award winner, to a 1-year, $11 million deal. Kluber entering his age 34 season, pitched just one inning in his lone season with the Rangers. Last year's shoulder injury. Opening day was their opening day starter, blows out his shoulder and was done. So the Yankees, after so much time this offseason, no activity, nothing happening. We got the memes coming out about do something. We've got all this stuff. And Cashman, what are the Yankees doing? The Mets are making all of these moves. They finally lock in the guy that they needed to lock in, and they add some pitching as well. Attention now goes to the rotation, Sam, as you and I were talking about at a break. But I first want to get the initial reaction to LeMahieu, because to me that's a huge deal for them.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing for the Yankees here. And there was a ton of pressure around them, to be honest. I mean, it was weird because DJ LeMahieu wasn't necessarily in intense talks with other teams. You know, you heard little speculation here about maybe the Mets or another team like that, but it was never anything serious. It seemed like it was always going to be the Yankees. You know, DJ LeMahieu wanted the Yankees and the Yankees wanted him. It just came down to money, and it came down to years of the contract. And I feel like DJ LeMahieu certainly won out in terms of how long that contract is, 6 years. But the money-wise, I think New York was able to, you know, save a little bit of room there at $90 million. I expected him to sign for a little bit more, especially a guy who's, you know, win the batting title, has had 2 amazing years in New York. So signing for a little bit less, I feel like opened the door for the Yankees to maybe go out and get that starting pitching help, like you talked about. But overall, I mean, you got to love this DJ LeMahieu signing. They needed him back for sure. They needed him in this lineup. And I think I touched on this briefly in the rundown to open the show. I feel like DJ is one of those guys who I trust even later on in his career. He's 32 years old. 6 years would take him to his age 38 season. Most guys, I'm saying, okay, I don't trust that at all. But with DJ LeMahieu, he's always been a contact hitter. That's what he's done first. And he had some streaks of power last year. He had a very good year and the year before as well. But overall, he's always been a contact hitter. He's always played good defense. I don't expect that to change even as he ages. So I think this deal for the Yankees is going to help them out, not just next year or the year after, but also in the long run for them.
Yeah, when you think about DJ LeMahieu, too, he's a guy who does not rely on being a great athlete necessarily to be playing baseball. And that may sound not great, but it's the reality of what it is. He's not a Aaron Judge or Giancarlo Stanton who you feel like, all right, these are big guys who are really great athletes, and that's sort of how they're successful in being able to hit the ball at such a high exit velocity and play good defense and all of the things that make them the great players they are. That's not necessarily the case with DJ LeMahieu, particularly in his offensive production. So you feel like he is someone who even at age 38, not relying on being this physical specimen, could go out there and still be successful into his age 38, 39 seasons, because as perhaps his health, body capabilities would deteriorate, he's not overly reliant on those things to begin with. So you feel like he could navigate sort of being a player as a position player into his upper 30s in that sense. So that to me is point number one. But I'm in agreement with you that it was surprising to see the Yankees go to 6 years. That was not something that was really even reported, that it was sort of the difference between the 4 and the 5 years, and the Yankees wanted 4 and LeMahieu wanted the 5th. And what was that all going to look like? And the Yankees end up going to 6. But to me, in the way I look at it, is they were going to give him $90 million either way. 5 years, $90 million would have been sort of a good deal for them. So to me, it's more about kicking the salary down the road a little bit, where hopefully the Yankees in a few years are in a more financially stable situation, and we're out of this pandemic, and we've got fans coming in and watching the Yankees and everything revenue-wise that comes along with that, so the Yankees can go back and sort of be spending the way we sort of see the Mets are right now because of Cohen's situation and him not absorbing those same losses. So I think that that's really what this was about. I think in a perfect world, the Yankees would not have loved to go to a 6th year. I'm guessing that LeMahieu will be making, in the way that this thing is structured, more than $15 million this year. And then at the back end, it will really be a lot less as you get into that 5th or 6th year. So at that point, $15 million is something that if he becomes such an albatross for the Yankees and that they feel like he's not a guy who can come in and play on their major league roster, they can cut him. $15 million is not, in the Yankees terms, something that is something they want to waste, certainly, but at the same time, that's not an Alex Rodriguez contract where you're paying him at age 41 $30 million in a guy who just cannot do anything for you other than DH. And even at that, he's hitting 190, so you have to cut him. So I think that this is certainly a commitment that the Yankees are comfortable making and will be more happy with. The financial implications of it are not huge. I'm not going to scoff at $15 million, but for a player like LeMahieu right now, I think the consensus is that the Yankees won this deal. That's good for them, and everybody wins because DJ LeMahieu is back with the Yankees. This is where he wanted to be. I was never buying into him going elsewhere, particularly with what the market looked like. Other teams don't have that money to spend either, and if LeMahieu wanted to be in New York, that's where he was going to end up being, because if anyone was going to give him that money, it was going to be the Yankees. So LeMahieu back, and the Yankees later in the day, they add Corey Kluber. That to me is the next question. They got what they need done with LeMahieu, and now it's about fortifying that rotation and what does the pitching look like. You've got Garrett Cole for the next 8 years. He's in. He's your number one. Luis Severino presumably sets up to be your number 2. He's coming off of Tommy John surgery that was had at the beginning of when spring training was supposed to start, but he probably will not be ready for them until mid-season, maybe June, July for them in their rotation. Enter Corey Kluber, a guy who pitched 1 inning last year, has won 2 AL Cy Youngs. Pitchers have proven that they can pitch into their mid to late 30s, no problem. Justin Verlander has been ultra successful. Charlie Morton, another guy. So it's not like you're concerned in that sense. But Corey Kluber seems to be walking into a situation where the Yankees aren't necessarily, they're not taking a flyer. They're not trying to see, oh, well, maybe if we can get something from Kluber, that would be great. No. He's coming in. He's their 3rd starter right now. And particularly because Luis Severino is not going to be available to start, Yankees are going to need to get some production out of Corey Kluber.
Yeah, and that's what worries me, exactly what you just said there. They're not taking a guy as like, okay, maybe he can be the 4th or 5th starter. They're asking him to be what he, maybe not exactly what he was, obviously 2-time Cy Young Award winner, but at least something relatively close to it as his age, as a 34-year-old. So that's a lot to ask out of a guy who hasn't pitched in a long time, has obviously faced his fair share of injuries. And because of the lack of depth in this Yankees rotation, he's going to be asked to fill at least, like you said, at least a 3 spot in this rotation, at least until Severino comes back, which I think is another question mark. I mean, we talked about this over the break here. I think Severino's another question mark because he's obviously been hurt. We don't know what we're going to get from him when he comes back. We don't know if we can expect him to be the same pitcher he used to be. You have a guy in Garrett Cole. There's no debating that. He's the ace of this squad. But after that, I get a little nervous, and I don't see Corey Kluber as the full-time answer for that role. I know Jordan Montgomery's there too, and we haven't talked about him. He'll play a decent role in that starting rotation for sure. But I think at best, Corey Kluber for sure could be a number 3 guy. And if you get Severino back and Severino is what he was come playoff time, you have Garrett Cole, Jordan Montgomery, Corey Kluber, and Severino, which is a pretty good. That's all you really need is 4 guys there in the starting rotation. That's pretty good if Severino is what he was. But for me, there's just too many question marks that have me a little concerned. I'm not worried about the Yankees making the playoffs. I'm not even worried about them winning the division because that seems like it's at least more likely than not to happen, especially with this lineup and with DJ LeMahieu back. But this Corey Kluber decision for me, it's certainly an interesting one. It's a cheap one, which is maybe why they did it. It's certainly a good option at Corey Kluber's best. I think he can really help this team. But at its worst, he gets hurt, and then you're really short in that rotation, and Jordan Montgomery's your 2. And after that, you got a bunch of young guys with little experience that I think would overall hurt the Yankees. But I know you feel differently, Nick. I want to get your take on this too.
Well, I don't know that the questions are valid. I recognize those. But again, and as you alluded to, the premise is they're going to be in the playoffs, right? The Major League Baseball is expanding the postseason. It's going to be the 16 teams that are in. Like it or not, that's what it's going to be because the owners want to recoup some of the revenue that was lost this past season. So that's the reality of the world that we're dealing with right now. So at that level, the Yankees are in. The Yankees are a top 8 team in the American League, no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that they would be in. So at that point, you got to set your team up for postseason success because you're already in. And when you do that, Garrett Cole at number 1, Severino at number 2, assuming he's healthy. And again, I recognize that's an assumption, but you feel like he'll be good to go. Guys have had pretty good success coming off of Tommy John surgery at this point in Major League Baseball. I don't know that that's too huge of a question mark. I think Kluber is a bigger question mark than Severino. So at him at 2 and then Kluber at 3 and Montgomery at 4, that's to me as good of a rotation as they have run out in the last couple of years. It's pretty darn good. So you're hoping that you can get production out of Kluber. That to me is sort of the linchpin in the whole thing where if it goes south, you could be in trouble. But at the same time, I do think, and again, we were talking about this at the break, Kluber worked with the Yankees training staff in trying to recover. Some of the guys that also work independently of the Yankees during the offseason, and that was somebody who he was training with. So if they feel like he's good to go, and I also recognize some of the questions about the Yankees training staff, the way injuries have happened over the last couple of years. But if they're confident and they think he's good to go, I think that Corey Kluber can be a viable 3rd starter. You're asking him a lot because he's got to be a guy who stays healthy, and that's the question. At the same time, you're not asking him to come in and play the role that he was playing in Cleveland for those number of years of being that number 1 guy and having to go in and pitch to a 2.5 ERA for your team to be successful. No, Corey Kluber just has to come in and be healthy and relatively pitch the way he's capable of doing, and I think you're going to be happy with the contract that they gave him. But as you look at the landscape, that 1 through 4, that's the question to me. It's the rotation. That is what's left for the Yankees and holding them back from potentially being that bona fide World Series contender that we have been hoping they would be the last number of years. And it was a place where they were outpitched in the ALDS this past year. They were outpitched against Houston in the ALCS in 2019. So they are going to have to find some answers in that starting rotation. But I think this sets up nicely. Now, I would be interested to see if they could potentially bring back a guy like James Paxton at a pretty reasonable number. if he'd be interested in coming back if he is healthy, because I think that was a huge issue for him last year. I think this team could benefit from another sort of more proven arm. But again, at this landscape of baseball and the money that teams are willing to spend, I don't know that that's realistic. They also have Davy Garcia in that fold as well, who impressed a lot of people towards the tail end of last year. So there's a lot of questions to be answered. But at the same time, assuming that Severino is healthy, which I think you're confident in him, and I think that Corey Kluber is healthy enough, and I'm confident in that sort of situation as well. That 1, 2, 3 is as good as anyone in the American League.
Yeah, and I'm going to disagree with Craig Carton here, who we interviewed earlier, who said, talking about kind of providing excuses for the Yankees not getting to the World Series, haven't been since 2009. And I will recognize that the Yankees are a very solid team and have been probably the best team in New York, at least recently, for sure. So that's something to recognize for this team. But they haven't gotten over the hump and they haven't gotten to the World Series in a while. And there's something to be said about that. And I think if you're looking at a team, after they got DJ LeMahieu, even talking about DJ LeMahieu before he signed, and I kept thinking to myself, and a lot of people were saying this too, is this still going to be enough? Because this is a very similar team as it was last year. And this team last year, I mean, sure, they ran into a Rays team that you brought up, Nick, that is not really as good as they were. They're not the same team anymore, obviously. But there's always going to be good teams standing in their way in big playoff games, and they haven't been able to get over those teams in years. And the window here of having these young stars like Aaron Judge, like Gleyber Torres, it's kind of shrinking. And at least to have them all affordable and have them all under one team, that window, I think, is shrinking. And you got to have some sort of enthusiasm here if you're the Yankees and think, well, we obviously felt like we had a really good team the last couple of years, but they haven't been able to get to the World Series. So why is that? What is it in our team? Where's the weakest spot that we need to improve? And I think for this team, it's starting pitching, maybe a little bit of bullpen help too, but mostly starting pitching. And just looking at this Corey Kluber deal, I just don't have confidence that it's enough, that it's enough to really get him over the edge, to get them to this World Series that honestly they should be playing in, because they're certainly a good enough team. They've been a good enough team for years. It's honestly a shock they haven't won one yet, obviously since 2009. So I think honestly, when you're looking at this team, you really need one more thing to get them over the hump. I thought starting pitching was going to be that thing, and give them credit. They got Corey Kluber. They got a guy to fill in that role and maybe help until Severino gets back. But it's a ton of question marks. And if I'm a Yankees fan, I'm not overall confident in the way this team is built for October. They're going to win now. They're definitely going to make the playoffs. Like you said, expanded playoffs. But how are they going to do if they face a team that's been on a roll, that's been hot lately? I don't know who it's going to be. Who knows? Or even in the World Series facing a really solid team, whoever that may be. How are they going to be? How are they going to hold up? It's just a lot of question marks for me, I must say.
I mean, I agree with you to a point, but at the same time, who is that team going to be? Like when you look at the landscape of the American League, I don't see it. And sometimes it's sort of the battle of attrition where you keep just running the same guys out there at times that have had success. I mean, you can't just, your team's not good, don't run the same guys out there, but this has been a team that has had success and has been good. And then you look at the landscape of everything else, and it's like, I don't know who challenges them. They're on paper have to be the favorites to come out of the American League. Of course, the point is now dealing with the Dodgers and some of the other teams in the National League. I think the Padres as well, staking a claim to being a really deep team in the NL West. But I don't know who that other team is in the American League right now. I mean, just when you look at it, the Astros are not, they made a run. They had a losing record last year and were able to win a playoff series. So good for them. But I don't see them being a team that's able to challenge the Yankees. They're good enough on offense. They're going to lose Michael Brantley, presumably, to that lineup. And Justin Verlander is also coming off of Tommy John surgery. At him, a much more advanced age than Luis Severino. The Rays have traded away Blake Snell and are making a couple of other moves, and I think that they will be good. I am not disagreeing with that. They always are a team that will compete, but you lose Blake Snell, that's a huge deal. So as much as you want to be critical or say, oh, it hasn't happened, well, maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year that they're able to get over the hump. Because when I look at the landscape of the American League, I just don't see who challenges them right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a valid point, but I just think about the last couple of years, and it feels like the Yankees have been the favorite in the American League, at least last year. I know 60 games is a shorter season, so sure. And then they didn't expect the Rays to be what the Rays were, and the Rays kind of came out of nowhere for sure. Even the Astros, I think, were better than expected in 2020. But I'm looking at the past, and I'm looking at past Yankees teams, and it seems like these conversations come up a lot. Like, this is our year. This is a really good team. This team is built for the World Series, and they keep falling short. And I don't know why. I don't understand why. And it seems to be a different sort of weakness for each team. But this weakness is starting pitching, and it's very obvious. And I know you're going to, there's an argument, well, the Yankees don't necessarily have the spending freedom to go out and get a big name like Trevor Bauer or something like that. And that's okay. I guess I kind of understand that, although it's the New York Yankees. So when have the New York Yankees have a problem spending money? I'm not so sure.
In 2021.
I guess so, but I don't know. I feel like other teams are going out and making moves. You look at the Mets, they're making big moves. Obviously, Steve Cohen and his checkbook will help there. But honestly, I can't get over the starting pitching problem. I can't look past it. I think this very well could be the year for the Yankees. It could be the year, just like the last couple of years could have been the year for the New York Yankees. I'm not saying it can't be, because if the pieces come together, Corey Kluber avoids injury and pitches well, Severino comes back, pitches well, come playoff time, those four, in addition to Montgomery and Garrett Cole, of course, I think are for sure the favorites. With that, especially with that lineup, they're for sure the favorites. They can run out Garrett Cole as many times as he can. And I'm not doubting that. I'm just doubting if all those guys can get there and be as successful as they were. And the fact that over the last couple of years, they haven't done it. They haven't delivered when people have said, this Yankees team is World Series bound. This Yankees team is the best team in the American League, and they haven't delivered. So that worries me.
I understand it. I get it. At the same time, I think that it's best to look at these teams independently. It's a new team. It's a different team. And the landscape of the league is certainly looking a lot differently. And they probably should have been there in 2017 based upon what we know now. So, how does that change things, or what do things look like if that had gone differently? Of course it did not, but that's also something to keep in mind. And they have run into a couple hot teams too. Boston in 2018 was as good a team as there was, and certainly have not been able to replicate that as a team that, won 108 games in their own division. And then they run into Houston again with questions about what was going on again. And last year, certainly not able to do it in a truncated season that was all over the place. So I understand the concerns, and I think that they are valid. But at the same time, the Yankees are really good. And especially now in looking at the rest of the American League in particular, I just think they have the best roster. That's just me. And I get it. And I've been critical of the Yankees too, because they need to play better at times. That is without a doubt the thing for me. Starting pitching has been an issue at times. They won't be running out Jay half there anymore. So that I think is a big deal and a big win for them. I'm honestly more concerned about the bullpen right now, or at least close to it, because I think that Aroldis Chapman down there at times has been difficult, although he was really good in the regular season, and I'm comfortable with him on the whole, in Britton and Canely being gone, and Chad Green down there as well. Adam Ottavino is the guy and the name that I'm trying to get to here and getting through their bullpen. But he's someone who they've signed to a lot of money here and has got to step up. He's a dude they're going to have to find and figure out. So that's something that concerns me as well. In a bullpen that, as much as the starting rotation was a conversation about, was it good enough? Is it not good enough? What does it look like? They were in a position to win a number of games last year, again, 60-game season, that their bullpen blew for them as well. And Adam Ottavino is a guy who I'm looking at and saying he really hasn't been existent since maybe the first half of the first year he was with the Yankees. So he's a guy who I'm looking to. I like where the rotation is at right now. I think we can agree to disagree, Sam, here. I think that Corey Kluber can come in and make an impact. And I'm interested to see what the Yankees will get from him, because I think that if he's healthy enough, and that, of course, is the question that no one can really answer well right now, I think the Yankees will have hit a home run with Cole, Severino, and Kluber at the top. That's as good as it gets in the American League, especially with the Rays trading off Blake Snell. We'll have to leave the Yankees there on the other side of this break. Jon Helmkamp of Deadspin. We're going to talk about the Nets, Jets, and a little bit of everything in the New York and sports landscape. There'll be more one-on-one right after this break. Stay with us.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Here on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Pleasure to be joined by Jon Helmkamp. He is a staff writer at Deadspin, co-host of the Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can find him on Twitter at DynastyBeard. Jon, how are you today? Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So we want to start off, ton of news to get to here. I want to start off in the NBA and the reaction to James Harden and the trade that makes him a Brooklyn Net. When you see that news go down, what is your initial thought and what's the reaction there?
Yeah, I mean, it was a massive trade and it just kind of came out in stages over the course of like 5-10 minutes, right? So you had the initial trade that showed that he was going to the Nets, you know, in exchange for Karis LeVert and some picks, and then you start getting all the details of it. And then like 5 minutes later, you find out that Houston flipped Karis LeVert to Indiana in exchange for Victor Oladipo. So it was a massive, massive shift. It's probably one of the biggest, like, compensation-wise trades that we've seen. I mean, you had 4 unprotected firsts and 3 players, and then 4 first-round swaps between the 2 teams in exchange for just James Harden. So I think that it's going to be a very, very interesting dynamic that they're going to have to figure out there between 3 big alpha personalities, you know, that tend to have a lot of off the court stuff going on around them at all times. It's going to be interesting to see if they can blend it all together. I think that it's one of 2 things. It either goes incredibly well and we see them in the NBA finals, or it's an absolute train wreck. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how they blend that all together.
So, Jon, you talked about that there at the end. The expectations, obviously, for the Brooklyn Nets right now are extremely high. What are your realistic expectations for this team after the Harden trade?
Well, I think one of the things that they have going for them is that Harden and Kevin Durant played together. at Oklahoma City. So you have some built-in chemistry there already, which is going to help things. Now, whatever's going on off the court with Kyrie Irving, and he got a big fine handed to him today for going to a party. So if they can get him back in the building and focused on basketball now that they have Harden there, I think that the built-in chemistry between Kevin Durant and James Harden is going to be really, really helpful to them being able to piece it together, because you're right. They are all in on this being a championship roster. They've sunk so much capital into these three players. The expectation is championship ring or bust. And them being in the Eastern Conference, I think they've got a chance at making a good run at it. And the fact that this is early in the season that this trade happened, they're going to have some time to kind of iron out the wrinkles and get everything how they want it to be. The Eastern Conference is going to be really easy for them to make the playoffs, right? It's not that hard to accomplish. So I think for them, it's just going to be getting everything ironed out, get into the playoffs, give yourself a chance to get in, and then make a run at it and see what happens. So I think that they're going to be interesting to watch. And they should, come springtime, April or so, probably be clicking pretty well and be a dangerous team.
Jon, perhaps it's impossible to know because it seems to be something that everyone is trying to figure out recently. But how do you think this affects Kyrie Irving and his mentality about everything that has been going on with him in Brooklyn? And also another member of this organization, Steve Nash, is a first-time head coach. How do you think that this deal affects those two?
I think it's a huge test for Steve Nash as a coach, because he's never been a coach and he was never a big vibrato guy when he was playing. You know what I mean? He was like the quiet leader on the court. So I think this is going to be a really big test in terms of, can you get these three personalities to focus on basketball instead of all the off the court issues? James Harden is not exactly in the best shape of his life right now. He's going to have to work back into some playing shape. And you've got Kyrie Irving, who's just kind of floating adrift away from the team, popping into political Zoom calls, just all over the place. It's like, dude, get back with the team, get on the court, let's focus on basketball, and let's try to make a run at it. And I think that them bringing in Harden, I think, shows Kyrie Irving that this organization is all in on making a championship roster. And I think that is going to start shifting his attention back to basketball. Again, it's going to be really interesting to watch. It could be absolutely amazing, or it could just be a beautiful disaster that takes place for the Nets. It's going to be one or the other.
So obviously after this trade, there is certainly a lot of people that brought up some of the big issues surrounding trading for James Harden. I want to bring up two, and I want to think, which one do you think is a bigger issue, whether it be defense, who obviously lost Jared Allen and gained a poor defender in James Harden, or is it going to be the team chemistry like you talked about, which will play a huge role with Harden coming to this team?
Well, I think that the defensive casualty is pretty dramatic. Now, Mike D'Antoni is also on this staff, and if there's anything that he's shown us in the past when working with Harden, is that he doesn't really care about defense if you can outscore the other team. That's like his whole philosophy on everything, is just shoot the ball. And I think that that's how they're building this team. It's going to just be an offensive, onslaught by the time everyone's clicking on all cylinders. And that's going to be their philosophy. We saw the Lakers when they were on their way to their championship in the bubble over the summer. Their defense was killing it. Their defense was playing incredibly good. They were closing out on the perimeter. They were limiting the big plays, the threes, things like that. So if we're looking way too far out in advance, further than we should, and if it's going to be those two teams that could potentially be meeting for the NBA Finals, you're going to have two very polar opposite philosophies that are going to be, trying to win out. It's going to be, our strength is it better than your strength? And that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. So I think that losing the defense is probably less than ideal, but when you have 3 guys on your roster that can give you a triple-double on any given night, I think that that's the way that they wanted to go about this.
Talking to Jon Helmkamp, staff writer at Deadspin, co-host of the Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast. John, I want to switch over to the NFL. The Jets make it official, or at least in principle, they're going to hire the 49ers defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh. What is your impression of the hiring of Saleh, and why is he the right guy for the Jets right now?
Yeah, I love Robert Saleh. He's been great. And as a Seahawks fan, I'm happy to see him leave my division. The dude just knows football. He's a hard worker, and he's a high energy guy. And I think that with this organization, coming out of the Adam Gase era, which was just awful, there was no like connection between Adam Gase and his players that was, like physically palpable to the outside. I think that bringing in Robert Saleh, you're bringing in someone that's gonna bring in the energy, the work ethic, the desire to connect, with his players, be a player's coach, and do good things from a culture standpoint. And when you're as far away as the Jets are, because they're far right now, that's what it needs to start with. You need to start with that vision, with that philosophy, with the culture, the tone of the team, and then start building from there. So I think that Saleh is going to do a great job in that aspect. And then he's a very, very good defensive-minded coach as well. So as they're looking ahead and they're looking at draft capital that they have available to them and they're looking at things like that, I think that the GM would be wise to allow him to have a lot of say in the kind of players that he wants to come into this team and who they want to bring in to fit, the culture and the system that he's going to put in place. I think it's a great hire. I think it's a slam dunk. I think that this is a much better hire for them than someone that's just supposed to be like the next offensive whiz kid. Like, let's go the opposite direction. We tried the offensive whiz kid with Adam Gase, the quarterback whisperer, when he was down there in Miami, which is hilarious because Tannehill's killed it ever since leaving him. Go the opposite direction. Get a culture guy, a hard work guy, kind of a quote unquote just football guy. You know what I mean? That old school kind of approach to football. I think it's going to fit their organization really well.
Speaking on Robert Saleh, what do you expect him to do with the whole Sam Darnold situation and the NFL draft? Do you think he should keep Sam Darnold and look to draft someone else, or what do you think about that?
I think that when you're looking to build a roster, one of the things that is going to give that roster the most flexibility going forward is a cheap quarterback contract. Sam Darnold's already been in the league for a few years. They're coming up on the point where they're going to need to make a decision and either extend him or move on. I think that being able to kind of press the reset button and go quarterback at 2 and lock in a very good quarterback prospect, it could be Justin Fields. If Trevor Lawrence somehow inexplicably is there at 2 instead of going at 1, presumably to Jacksonville, then you just run that to the podium. I think going that route and giving yourself that contract flexibility, that cap room flexibility for the next 4 years under that rookie contract is going to help them rebuild this roster more than sticking with Sam Darnold and having to pay him coming up here shortly. So I think it could be a situation where we see Sam Darnold get traded to someone that has cap space and might think that they can unlock him, like the Colts, for instance, who have an aging out quarterback situation, good cap room, good offensive line, good defense. Something like that could be an interesting fit. So I would expect that they're going to go quarterback, but Robert Saleh being the defensive-minded guy, he might look to that side of the ball or trade down and try to get more capital to continue to turn over this roster.
You mentioned Trevor Lawrence, and as it stands right now, it seems as though he will be on his way to Jacksonville, who just hired their new head coach, one of 2 vacancies to be filled thus far in the NFL. That man will be Urban Meyer, the ultra-successful college football coach at University of Florida to Ohio State, has been out of the game the last couple of years working on Fox. What did you think of Urban Meyer making the transition to the NFL? There's a lot of skepticism from a lot of people around the league saying, yeah, I'm not so sure this is going to work. What do you think?
I'm not so sure it's going to work either. I think there's a very big difference between college coaching and NFL coaching. We've seen it, work some in the past. We've seen Pete Carroll be able to kind of bring, his view and his energy and his connection to the players and translate that to the NFL level. But we've also seen a lot of very successful college coaches not know how to manage, grown men that are getting paid to do this, as opposed to college kids that are, they're on scholarship and looking to make their way to the NFL. So it's going to be interesting. One of the things that I do think he's got to his advantage is that Jacksonville doesn't really have any superstars to contend with right now in terms of like a butting head situation. He's going to be building it. So I think that works to his advantage. They've got a lot of cap space. They've got a lot of draft picks. They've got the number 1 overall pick. They have a real opportunity to make a pretty quick turnaround here, similar to what we saw in Miami. Miami didn't make it into the playoffs this year, but they went from being a bottom team to on the cusp of a wild card berth. Jacksonville has the capability of potentially doing that next year in, not the strongest division in football, a good division with the Titans and the Colts, but they should be able to invest pretty heavily on the defensive side of the ball in free agency, be able to get a quarterback of the future with the number 1 overall pick, roll with James Robinson at running back for another season, and, start piecing things together to be going in the right direction. So the Urban Meyer hire is very interesting. I am skeptical if it's going to translate to the NFL. But the guy clearly does know football. And if he can manage the players correctly, I think that he's got a chance at putting together something kind of cool in Jacksonville.
Staying in the NFL, but switching here a little bit to the NFL playoffs coming up, obviously this weekend, the divisional round. Tom Brady and Drew Brees are going to square off in a big matchup. Which quarterback do you think has more pressure on them to win that game?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm going to say the pressure's on Tom Brady, because I think that with him leaving New England and deciding to go somewhere else, like, it's Super Bowl or bust for Tom Brady. Anything short of another ring, people are going to start throwing around the questions. Was he a system guy? Was it just because of he and Bill Belichick up in New England? You're going to start raising those questions, which are dumb questions. The dude has more Super Bowl rings than anybody. But I think that everyone is looking at him to win this, while people are looking at the Saints and more just saying, yeah, they've got a chance at it. They've been close for the last few years. They haven't quite gotten over the hump, and it would be a really nice story for Drew Brees to go get another ring and go out on top like Peyton Manning did. But I think in terms of pressure, I think that Brady's under the pressure of this game the most, where like he has to perform well and show that Father Time's not catching up to him. He needs to win this game. The Saints beat him twice already this year. And he needs to prove that he can win outside of New England. At least I think that's the chip on his shoulder. That's what's in his mind, I think. To continue to cement that legacy as the greatest of all time, go win somewhere else.
Talking to Jon Helmkamp, staff writer at Deadspin, co-host of the Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast. John, I'll get you out of here on this one. We talked about the elder statesmen in the NFC, young quarterbacks in the AFC, with all four of them being drafted as recently from 2017. What are your impressions of what's going on in the AFC, and who do you like this weekend?
Man, the AFC's fun. You're right. You've got all these young quarterbacks that are taking over the AFC side of the ball. Like, the average age of the starting quarterbacks this weekend is like 24 or 25 in the AFC. And in the NFC, it's like 37, and the Rams bring down the average. It's pretty crazy. The AFC is really fun. A lot of youth, a lot of excitement, coming on that side. I think while it's been a good story for the Browns, I think their road ends here with Kansas City. I think that's probably one of the easier games to pick this weekend. On the other side of it, I'm going to go Ravens over Bills. I don't think we've seen the Bills be able to slow down the run enough. I think that could be critical in that game. The Ravens are just humming right now. They look like they can hang 200 rushing yards on anyone at any time. In the NFC, I'm going to go with the Rams over the Packers. I think that the defensive front is going to be a problem. I think that Jalen Ramsey is going to be a problem. If he can slow down Devontae Adams and keep him to just at least an average game, I think they've got a chance at pulling off that upset. And then I am going to go Buccaneers over Saints as well, just because Tom Brady's never lost 3 times in a season to one team, and I think that they find a way to get that one done.
There you go. There are your picks for the divisional round this weekend. Jon Helmkamp, staff writer at Deadspin, co-host of the Red Shirts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can find him on Twitter at DynastyBeard. Jon, thanks so much for your time. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll be back with more one-on-one right after this.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back to One-on-One, and welcome back to another headline segment. And we talked a little about this topic on Wednesday night show and also on our weekly Pick and Pod NBA podcast. But it's simply the biggest news in sports this week. So of course, I got to bring it back for this headline segment today, and that is that James Harden is officially a Brooklyn Net. The 31-year-old is teaming up with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving after a blockbuster deal went down Tuesday night, which included 4 teams, 5 draft picks, 4 draft swaps, and 7 players. Karis LeVert now on the Pacers, who flipped Victor Oladipo to the Rockets, and the Cavs now find themselves with Jarrett Allen, Brooklyn's former most elite interior defender, who ranks 7th among all players in total blocks since entering the league in 2017. Now, a lot to unpack there. Obviously, a huge deal, one of the biggest we've had this season and even in this offseason before the start of the season. So 3 big players, 3 of the best offensive weapons on one team. Nick, is that going to be an issue? Is it too much to try and share the ball between 3 superstars like that?
The question that everyone wants to know and that everyone seems to be skeptical about at the least, some less concerned, some more, but that seems to be what everyone is trying to figure out. By the way, Pick and Pod available iTunes, WFUVsports.org, wherever you get your podcasts. But that's what is going to be really challenging for them to try and figure all this stuff out. And in particular, I think it is going to circle back inevitably to Kyrie Irving and what the heck is going on with him that nobody knows. Like, is this dude going to end up showing back up? Are we dealing with 3 players and having to try and figure out how to share the ball, or is it going to be KD and James Harden? So that's the other thing here that I think is something that can't be ignored. But assuming that all 3 come back, it's one of those things that's fascinating, because these are guys that just on the surface, you would say, yeah, I mean, you got 3 of the top, 15, 20 players in the NBA. And that's how far down the line do you want to put Kyrie Irving, because Harden and Durant are 2 of the top 5. But at the same time, you have the potential for those guys and what they do well being diminished, because you got to share the basketball, and they're not guys who are going to go out there and catch and shoot and sort of pieces that you feel like, wow, these fit really well together. Golden State, you were like, all right, that's with 3 stars, you feel great about it, because Kevin Durant is going to get his and score whenever he wants. And Steph Curry was fine being a number 2, but a guy who can score and shoot from anywhere, whether it be off the dribble, whatever it is. Steph Curry can be great in any area, shooting the basketball on offense and also passing and sharing in the court vision. And then Klay Thompson is a guy who doesn't even need to dribble. A guy doesn't dribble. I mean, it's one dribble and shoot. That's what Klay Thompson does, and that's what his game is. And that's probably the best example of a big 3 that has worked as well as it did. So it's just an odd sort of assortment of pieces. And as you look at the history of those, you don't have to go down up and down the list of the things that have been successful, but even Miami in the same way, LeBron and Wade and Bosh seem to fit better than these 3 do. It's hard to ignore the talent, because they are as talented as it gets. And I think that they will be very much helped by, as much as their depth is diminished, they still have, I think, enough. They didn't trade everything away and have enough cap space to where someone becomes available, waivers, mid-level exception. They'll be okay in that sense. I'm just fascinated to see how the ball sharing works and how the defense works, because we know that Harden is a guy who's going to want to dominate possession. Durant is going to be a guy who wants to dominate possession and should, because he's the best player on the team. And Kyrie Irving is not a shooting guard. That's not who he is. So it'll be interesting to see how that fits together. And then the defense, right? These are guys who notoriously are not the greatest of defenders. Now, maybe the Mike D'Antoni philosophy as their assistant coach, offensive coordinator is, who cares, because we'll just put up 140 a night and it won't matter. But at the same time, you feel like some attention for a team that has aspirations of winning the NBA Finals ought to be on the defense. We'll see how it works. Kind of like these head coaching hires. Hard to say. Time will tell, particularly because we don't know when Kyrie Irving is coming back. But I'm inclined to say it works, because superstars make the NBA work. And I think that these guys are committed to making it work in a way that if they weren't, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. You know that KD and Kyrie signed off on it. But there's only one basketball, so time will tell. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it on the Wednesday one-on-one nightly, of course, we all brought up a good point that if the Nets win a championship in whatever window they have all 3 of these guys, as long as they have Harden and Kyrie's back on the court and KD, whatever window that may be, which looks to be maybe 2-3 years, if they win an NBA championship, this is all worth it. And no matter what they gave away, it's 100% worth it. But for me, I just look at all the negatives and all the problems that this kind of trade represents versus those opportunities. Because strictly talent-wise, yes, this team is certainly good enough, and especially in a superstar-driven league, to win the NBA Finals. But you look at all the problems, Nick, that you just mentioned. I mean, the defense is a huge problem. You trade away a guy like Jared Allen, who's one of your best defenders. You're going to have to score, it looks like 150 a night in order to beat these teams. And maybe not that much, but certainly it puts a lot of pressure on the offense, and this defense is just not really suited to do that. And then the chemistry is another huge thing too. I think you have a lot of pressure to get Kyrie Irving back on the court, because you got to figure out how to share the ball between 3 superstars. And you mentioned Golden State, which worked obviously with kind of those 3 superstars. But in that scenario, I feel like Klay Thompson was okay being that number 3 guy. He was okay with that. and he bought into it and was willing to go out and win championships, being that number 3 guy. Here, I don't see Harden or Kyrie being okay being that number 3 guy. KD is obviously the number 1 option. He's the best of the 3, I would say. But even Kevin Durant, he's the most unselfish out of the 3. He's the best teammate out of the 3. And that's a good problem to have. But it worries me a little bit because Kevin Durant needs to be the number 1 option on this team. And then Harden and Kyrie will follow suit. And I hope that's the case, because in order for this Nets team to be the best they can offensively, Kevin Durant needs to get his fair share of touches, his fair share of shots. And then you figure out between Harden and Kyrie, who's that number 2, who's that number 3. Maybe they're both number 2, I guess. But the situation, that's a huge issue. And as long as Kyrie Irving stays off the court here, that issue is going to continue to be prominent, because I think they need him back, and they need all 3 of these guys. That's exactly what they traded for. They got Harden, but they got Harden with the assumption they're going to have all 3 back to win an NBA championship. And they obviously wasted quite a lot of their future to go out and get these guys, a ton of draft picks, which I think is obviously a big issue in addition to the defense and the chemistry. For me, all of these negatives and all of these concerns seem to simply outweigh the one positive, which is, okay, talent-wise, they can go win an NBA championship. Sure, if they win, good for them, they deserve it, and all of these negative opportunities are no longer. But for me, I just can't stop thinking about the team chemistry when Kyrie's back, how they're going to share the ball, the defense, a bunch of big issues for concern.
Yeah, but it just, in this league now, mortgaging the future has become the best way to contend for a title. I mean, you look at 4 of the best teams in the league right now: the Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, and Nets. And all 4 teams have given up a ridiculous amount of draft picks in the past few years to build these teams, to build these big 3s, these dynamic duos, bring in all-stars and try and have this win right now mentality. And that kind of started with LeBron. I know Nick mentioned this a little bit, but, LeBron, he comes in, you start with Miami. He did that. He brings in players, and then he stays there for a few years. LeBron in LA, as he's 33, he's in his 16th season. He's not going to wait around for young players to develop. He wants to win rings. So he pushes for a trade to get Anthony Davis. They give up, almost every draft pick they have for the next 5 years, and a lot of young talent like Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, just to get this one superstar. But it's paid off, has it not? They won last year, and obviously this year, as of right now, they're still looking like, the most legit, in my opinion, championship contenders. So one could argue that, best case scenario, it is worth it, and it has proven to be successful. But on the flip side, like you mentioned, Sam, the window is small. Durant's 32, Harden's 31, Irving's 28, and they've already given up a significant chunk of their future draft capital. So, and all of those 3 players have player options after the 2021-2022 season. So you got to wonder, how big is this window of opportunity that they have to win a championship? And if they don't, what happens then? Like you said, I think Kyrie Irving is one of the biggest questions in this equation. Is he going to stay long-term, especially knowing that he's most likely going to be, that third fiddle in that trio, and which he hasn't had to do in the past. He's gotten out of situations in the past when he wasn't the top priority. You think of him with LeBron in Cleveland, he was tired of being overshadowed by the best player, arguably one of the top 2 best players of all time. So, and he wasn't okay with that. And now he's with 2 other guys who are better than him. So I think that's a big question. And yes, James Harden has come out and said that he's going to be willing to share the ball and that he just wants to do whatever he can to win. But saying it and doing it is they're 2 very different things, especially from a guy who's, how many times does he ISO per game? He's his whole game is playing on the ball. And so having to switch that up completely and play off the ball with 2 other, offensive threats like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, that's going to be a whole different side of Harden that we really haven't seen up to this point. He's been the sole and main and guiding central part of the Houston Rockets offense for the better part of a decade. So that's what he's used to, and that's what he's comfortable with. And so coming into this team and having to share that, I think is a big question mark. But speaking of question marks, Kyrie Irving, he hasn't said anything about this. He might not even know that this is happening. He's been MIA for how long now? For a week. And, breaking news yesterday, he was fined $50,000 for violating the league's health and safety protocols. The NBA was investigating a video that went viral of Irving at a private birthday party for his sister earlier this week with more than 15 attendees in the video, which is against the league's COVID-19 policy. He'll also lose 2 games of salary, which is worth roughly $820,000. He was fined $25,000 earlier this year for refusing to speak to the media, and these off the court issues just continue to pile up for Kyrie Irving. So, Sam, do you see this Kyrie continuing to be a problem off the court? Do you think this is going to affect the Brooklyn Nets' chances as we get later on into the season and towards the postseason and playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly will. And I even think I'll go out to say a little bit on a limb here, and I'm not 100% positive, obviously, but this is just what I think. I think trading for Harden for the Brooklyn Nets had Kyrie in mind when they made this trade, because they don't know where he is, and they don't know if he's going to be back. And there were even talks of retirement. And I know that he never obviously addressed those thoughts, but they were out there because he's been gone for such a long amount of time, and he hasn't said exactly why. It's been personal reasons. He said, I don't want to play, which is a terrible excuse. Meanwhile, he's missing out on $800,000, which I wish that was my salary for 2 games. But anyway, I just think this trade for Harden here, they definitely thought about Kyrie when they made this decision, because at the very least, they're going to have Harden and KD, who have played together before and seem to both want to be with each other. So that's certainly something that'll help win games. But if they want to find success down the road, and like we said, it's really NBA Finals or bust for the Nets for the next couple of years in this window, they need Kyrie Irving back on the court. And it's not just for his playing ability, but it's also for them as three. As the trio there, to figure out how to share the ball, to figure out how to best work together, not only with themselves, but also with the other guys on the team. Because we're talking about, these 3 guys, and rightfully so, they're the 3 superstars, but there are also 2 other guys on the court at the same time, at least, guys on the bench. You have Steve Nash, who's a first-year head coach, an awful lot on his plate. I just think Kyrie needs to get back on the court in order to really try and figure out how to play together with not only Kevin Durant and Harden, but also the guys in the rest of the lineup and on the bench, and even with head coach Steve Nash. It's a lot to figure out, and I don't trust the Nets in figuring that out in a short amount of time. Right now, you have the benefit of having a big season ahead of you and an opportunity to really, there's no doubt the Nets are going to make the playoffs. That's never a doubt. It's kind of like we talked about with the Yankees. There's no doubt they're going to make the playoffs, but what they do when they get there is extremely important. And right now is the opportunity in the regular season where Kyrie can get back and learn how to play with these guys and really develop a little bit of team chemistry. I'm not asking for a lot. I'm not expecting a lot, but at least a little bit of ability to play with each other, I think, is huge for the rest of this season. So then come playoff time, they're already used to sharing the ball. They're already used to determining, KD's that number 1, and then me and Harden and Kyrie fit into that number 2 and 3 spot. Or whatever it may be, or playing under Steve Nash. And that's something they definitely have to figure out. I think Kyrie needs to get back on the court as soon as possible to figure that all out, because it's certainly not going to be easy. It's going to take a while. I think it's essential. If the Nets want to find success from this trade, it's NBA Finals or bust over the next couple of years. They need Kyrie Irving as a part of that equation.
I agree with you, particularly when you're talking about making sure that these guys are comfortable playing with one another. And a guy who I don't think has factored into this equation enough is Steve Nash as the head coach. And people are talking about him, but to me, just not enough about how he's going to manage all this stuff as a first-year head coach. And there's been some criticism about how he is done, to the point where we've got reporters asking Kevin Durant after games, how's he doing? What do things look like? And Durant's already, 10 games in, having to come to the defense of his head coach, who some people are skeptical about and were skeptical about when they made the move to hire him. But it's so clear to me that Sam, you're so right in, they have to find a way to get back onto the court with one another to figure all this stuff out. And this isn't new. How long did it take for LeBron and Wade and Bosh to be comfortable playing with one another, and LeBron and Anthony Davis. And there's an argument to be made that Kawhi and Paul George still aren't comfortable playing with one another. So this stuff we know takes time. So Kyrie's got to get back as soon as possible because, yes, again, no doubt they're making the playoffs. They'll be fine to get there. But again, this stuff is won on the margins. The NBA Finals and advancing and success in the playoffs is won, on the margins and finding a way to win against other really good teams. You're not just going to walk through the Eastern Conference. And yes, they probably are the most talented, but they're going to have to learn how to play with each other and play to each other's strengths so that they can be in a good position to win. The thing that strikes me about looking at this whole thing and how everything fits together is it potentially not that they won't get along or that they won't try to share the basketball, but will that make some of their players, again, because you feel like Durant's the centerpiece, potentially James Harden and Kyrie Irving, will that make them less effective? It's not that, James Harden won't pass or James Harden won't, accept not handling the ball a ton. But if it's James Harden becomes a catch and shoot guy, is he going to be the same player, a top 5 player in the league like we consider him right now? I don't know. The point is that they're going to have to figure all these things out and adjust to a different style of play. And the sooner that they can do that, the better, because as time wears on, if Kyrie continues to miss an extended period of time, there's almost a point where you're like, it might be counterproductive to introduce him back into the fold. Like that to me is a real concern. And he's as great a player as there is. And if you thought about it in a different way, if Kyrie was available for trade for Brooklyn, they'd make the move. They'd bring him in too. There's no doubt in my mind that they would make that move. Of course they're not. But at the same time, they got to figure this thing out quickly with a first-time head coach, with 2 guys and puzzle pieces that on the surface don't seem to mesh perfectly together. So they've got a lot to figure out in a short amount of time with some personalities in there as well. That's why we're talking about it. That's why it's so exciting and compelling. But they are going to have a lot of questions to answer, and there is a healthy amount of skepticism surrounding this trade, and particularly surrounding Kyrie Irving, because that's what's holding all this stuff together. That it's him and his uncertainty about where he is and how he's going to react. You feel like Kevin Durant's going to be fine. The question now is about Kyrie Irving.
Right. And, the Nets, if you look at their roster right now, you mentioned the Eastern Conference isn't that easy. It may not be the Western Conference, but the Nets still have to deal with players like Joel Embiid or Anthony Davis. And right now, their best option to defend those types of players is Kevin Durant, and that's not exactly who you want taking that huge load defensively. And they still have their mid-level exception. They have a bunch of second-round picks still, and they might even get a disabled player exception because of Spencer Dinwiddie's season-ending injury. So there's still options, there's still possibilities. But like you said, Kyrie Irving presents a huge question for this team. And another question for every team in the league right now, and the league itself, has been COVID-19 and just what we've seen across the league this past week in the amount of cancellations and players testing positive or having to sit out due to contact tracing. So far this season, 13 games have been postponed due to either teams not having enough players or just too many health and safety protocol issues. And there have been a plethora of other instances where teams have been forced to play extremely shorthanded. The 76ers played a game with 8 people, but one of them was on crutches. So it's just gotten ridiculous. Karl Anthony Towns, whose mother was one of the 6 other family members in his family to die from complications stemming from the virus in April, he just tested positive for the virus as well. The Wizards, who have had enough problems on the court this season, just announced 6 of their players tested positive for COVID-19. So you're seeing an increase in cases, an increase in issues, teams, games being canceled. And you got to wonder, the league came out and added some new protocols, but they didn't announce any shutdowns, any breaks, anything like that. So you got to wonder what direction this season is headed into and what the next step is for the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go first here. I mean, this is just, I would say, an incredibly tough situation for everyone involved. And I know that's kind of obvious, but it's certainly true. And when you, Kelly, you mentioned Karl Anthony Towns, and that's just really difficult. I can't imagine personally going through something like that, not only with your family, but also now personally yourself dealing with something like that. And yeah, I mean, I respect the NBA for meeting and discussing and trying to develop new stricter protocols, because at first the protocols could have been stricter, I felt like, anyway. And also other leagues I think about haven't really met and discussed and tried to tighten their protocols when things got bad. So that's a good first step for the NBA. But I also understand a little bit from the players' side of it, who are obviously upset, want to see their family, have spent, most of them have spent a year in the bubble away from their family, and that's obviously really difficult. But I have to honestly side with the league versus the players in this one, just because if you're a player and you don't like the protocols, you can always opt out. And you must have at least known going into this year that COVID-19 is a huge issue surrounding the entire world. So you have to take personal responsibility, just like the teams and everyone else does. Everyone all over the country outside of sports has to take a personal responsibility in doing what they can to be safe. And that's something I think as a player you had to take into account going into this season. And you can't expect and be blindsided by these changes here, because there's obviously a big problem in the NBA. They're getting quite a lot of games canceled, like you just mentioned, Kelly. So something has to be done about it. And the protocols, I guess, are something that the league can do and try and tighten up on it. And I think just overall in the NBA, all these players need to collectively buy into the idea that the safer they are, the safer the whole community is, and the more likely they get all their games in and do their job, to be honest. So I think that's something that maybe not all the players have really bought into totally, which is a little concerning, because if you're going to come and play a season in 2020 and 2021 with COVID-19, you have to buy into the idea that you have to be safe and you have to protect yourself in whatever way possible, whether that be masks or social distancing and all that. So I think, honestly, I understand the league going out and trying to tighten these protocols, and I side with them, because I think the players in this instance really need to do what's best for the league as a whole, and not just honestly think about themselves and their own personal situation, because that's easy to say because everything is tough. It's tough for everyone, but this is a greater goal here, and the greater goal is to finish this NBA season. Other leagues have had troubles and they've been able to work through it. So, you hope the NBA can do the same. Obviously, a vaccine coming, that'll help too. But the players really need to buy in over the next couple months to do the best that they can so that the NBA can finish this season.
I'm in agreement. Yeah, it's about doing your job, and I think that's what you sort of alluded to towards the end there, Sam, and that's what I liked in what you said. And you're an NBA player being paid how much money by the league. It's part of the job. It's part of what comes with the job, right? In the same way that we sort of got on Kyrie Irving again, not to bring him back into the fold here, but I don't want to talk to the media. Well, it's your job. You got to do that. So part of the job this year is dealing with COVID-19, and that is for everyone. That is part of life right now. So if you're fortunate enough to, quite frankly, have employment available to you and a way of doing this, where there are a lot of people in the United States right now who are finding challenges and struggles about trying to figure out when they'll be given the opportunity to work again. So I'm with you there in trying to figure things out about how this is going to look, and that's important. It's about following the protocols and doing what's necessary and needs to be done, because that's how this stuff works. And I'm hopeful that the NBA can sort of get things turned around a little bit. It's been a little bit of a rocky start. There's no way to say it otherwise, but that's been the case with a number of leagues that we've seen sort of try and do something where you're not in a bubble in the first way, right? It was challenging for Major League Baseball at the start. It was challenging for the NFL at the start, and they seem like they have sort of gotten things more under control more recently. Of course, they're different leagues and different approaches, but I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And it was inevitable that you would have players test positive. It was inevitable that games were going to be postponed. And I think the NBA was smart in only releasing the first half of its season and its schedule so that fans and players don't get their hopes up. And, they have that flexibility to build in these games and make up for anything that happened earlier in the season, later on in the season. The NBA, just as the rest of the country, is hopeful that vaccines and other options and other answers start to come out and we start to improve and make progress in dealing with this pandemic. So I think the league has handled a very difficult situation in the best way they can. I agree with you both, Sam and Nick, about the players. They kind of have to buy in, but at the same time, we don't know. There's so little that we really know about how COVID spreads and how people contract it. So, players might be, it's hard to, they can try and be as strict as possible, but at the end of the day, you're right. They're not in a bubble. It's not in a controlled environment. So, you could get it from going to the grocery store or, walking outside, touching the door of your apartment. So, there's just a lot of questions, but I think, the NBA has, upped some of their protocols, which is honestly the best they can do at this point. And hopefully the second half of the season, they're able to make up for some of these games.
Out of time on the NBA and on to the NFL divisional round of the playoffs. 8 teams facing tests. Kelly Bright, Sam Davis, and I, we've got the answers. Stick with us. We'll tell you everything you need to know on the NFL divisional round of the playoffs. Stick with us. To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Or so right here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. And guys, we have to get into the divisional round of the NFL playoffs and some really interesting matchups that I'm really excited about and really going to be happy to be able to park myself in front of the television and watch all of the football that will come our way this weekend, because we've got some really good matchups. Rams at Packers, Ravens at Bills. Saturday slate on to Sunday, Browns at Chiefs, and then the Buccaneers at the Saints, third time through for the Bucs and the Saints in a rematch of the NFC South regular season matchup that those two were able to undertake. Of course, the Saints taking both of those matchups. Before we get into sort of breaking down each matchup and what you guys think and who you guys like, What is sort of your initial reaction, excitement? What are you guys looking forward to the most from this weekend slate of games?
I was talking earlier about the fact that these games and all four of them, when I'm picking these games, there's certainly easier picks than others, but for the most part, all of them are just looks like really exciting and close games. And that's just an exciting for a general football fan, no matter who you're rooting for. It's just exciting, like you said, Nick, to sit on the couch and watch some really good football for 2 days in a row. And they all plan to be really good games with really good matchups. I mean, even some of the teams that you think, okay, this team has a very obvious advantage over the other, or maybe, this team's expected to win over the other. Even in those games, I think they're going to be close. And I think that's just something that we're all going to have to look forward to and excited for. Hopefully some late game finishes in the playoffs, and you really can't ask for much more than that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this is probably the most exciting, series of playoffs games we've had in a while. And you said there's some teams that maybe are favored by a lot. For me, this was the most difficult series of picks I've had to make. It was so hard to pick between both in all of these games between the two teams. I think the matchups here are awesome. You have Breeze and Brady, which is always just a classic matchup. You have the number one rated offense versus number one rated defense. You have, Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes facing off just like they did in college with that 7 touchdown game. So just so many great matchups and very exciting football. And it's a bunch of teams that have all been peaking to this point, teams that have been trending upwards. There isn't really one team where you're like, oh, they haven't played as well in the past few weeks. They all are exciting teams. There's a lot of great storylines. And Nick, I know you're a Bills fan. There's just a lot of teams who haven't made it this far in the playoffs in a long time, or at least haven't had this kind of, serious contention for Super Bowl in a while. It's a lot of teams that, you aren't always, you don't always see in the big lights this late in the game. So it's very exciting.
So let's get into it. First game on Saturday, Rams at Packers, Lambeau Field, Green Bay, Wisconsin. The line is the Packers favored by 6.5. The Rams coming off a big win, avenging a late regular season loss to the Seattle Seahawks. John Wolford, their starting quarterback, gets hurt. Jared Goff coming off the thumb surgery, inserted, and that defense propels them to a win. Jared Goff does just enough. They meet up with the Packers, who have been as good as it gets in the NFC this entire season. Aaron Rodgers seems pretty likely on his way to an MVP award, and their offense with Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams has been really outstanding. Green Bay come off the bye. That can be good for some teams, not great for others. They have just been so good all season. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I'm inclined to take Green Bay. I know how good the Rams defense has been, but it just feels like I don't know where the offense is going to come from for the LA Rams, excuse me.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, like you just said at the end there. Where is this offense going to come from? I think if they, Jared Goff obviously back, but I don't think he's 100%. He certainly didn't look it last week. I don't expect a whole lot to change in a week, although he might be better. He's going to need to be a lot better because they can't rely fully on Cam Akers in the run game here for the Rams. They're going to have to be two-dimensional. They're going to have to throw the ball. And I don't really trust Jared Goff in this passing offense, especially in the cold weather of Lambeau Field. The Packers playing at home obviously helps. And also, I mean, you did mention that team's number one seed coming off a bye, it's good and bad at times. That's a little worrisome if you're a Packers fan. I would be just a touch, maybe because they haven't played in a few weeks. But that's just an issue that I feel like every number one seed gets told. But in this scenario, I really find it hard to pick this Rams defense. They say defense wins championships, and the Rams defense is certainly really good. And that matchup between the Rams defense and the Packers offensively is going to be so fun to watch. One of those matchups that Kelly, you mentioned for this whole weekend that is just really fun to watch from the jump and made this game harder to pick than it honestly should have been, because the Rams offensively, I feel like, are so average at best, while this defense, I think, is going to keep this team in the game and make this at least a decently close kind of matchup here. But overall, Jared Goff and the passing attack is not going to be enough. especially against this Packers offense, who has been very good this year, will continue to be good. It's hard for me to pick against a really good defense in the playoffs, but I'm going to, and I got the Packers in this one also.
Right. And they say defense wins championships, but this is the NFL. This is a quarterback league, and I think it's an offensive league at the end of the day. You know, you look at the teams that have been successful in the past, you know, at the end of the day, the best offense usually comes out on top. And in this case, you know, you look at Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, and I think they're clearly the better offense. And, you know, Jared Goff, obviously he is playing, but with an injured thumb, and he's not at 100%. And he has an injured hand in the cold. You know, they're going to Lambeau Field, which is going to make things much worse. And like you said, Sam, they're going to have to rely on their run game. And Green Bay's defense, especially their run defense, has actually played really well the past few games. They've allowed 16 or less in 4 out of the last 5, including to Tennessee, which has one of the most prolific run offenses in the league with Derrick Henry. And, you know, I think they're not going to have enough. Like you said, I just don't think the Rams are going to have enough offensive power to overcome Green Bay, especially when you have, like you mentioned, some of the offensive talents besides just Aaron Rodgers. You know, he has so many options. You know, I think Aaron Jones could have a really big game for the Packers. And I think one really exciting matchup is going to be Rams cornerback Jalen Ramsey and how he's able to line up against Davante Adams, who's been just absolutely phenomenal. You know, league leading 18 touchdowns, 1,375 yards on the season, and he's just looked great. So I think Davante Adams is going to outplay Jalen Ramsey, and I think that the Packers are going to come out on top.
Certainly a matchup to watch, and I just, again, you feel like there's a question about where the points are going to come from for the Rams, and it just creates, as good as the Rams defense has been, it creates such a small margin of error when you are not able to score, and the advantage goes to the offense in a lot of those cases, and you trust and feel a lot better about Aaron Rodgers coming into this game than you do Jared Goff, particularly with his thumb issue. And look, Sean McVay's been very good for them, and you never know, but certainly inclined to pick Green Bay in that one. Just, again, they're the number 1 seed there at home. Very rarely does that number 1 seed lose in the divisional round. Not saying it can't happen, but I think the offense is going to be good enough. On to the 8:15 game tonight. That is the Bills hosting the Ravens, Bill Stadium in Orchard Park. The line, 2.5. Translation, Vegas has no idea what the heck is going to happen, so they'll give 2.5 to the home team. This one has been pretty difficult to pick and get into because there's such, at least in what I have read and watched, a diversity in opinion about how this game might go. I'm interested to hear how the two of you feel about it, because there are so many things to dive into in two teams that play such a different style.
Yeah, me and Kelly will get our points across and let the Bills expert here jump in at the end. But I mean, in this game, honestly, like you said, this was one of the ones, and I'm not just saying this because I'm with you, Nick. It's one of the ones I was most excited to watch going into this weekend in the first place. Because of how close this game could be. Vegas has no idea, and this was certainly a difficult pick for me, and I think a lot of people. And I'll start with the Ravens here, and especially defensively last week. They did look very good, I think, stopping Derrick Henry. But they're going to have a much different task this week. You know, the Bills don't run the ball too much. They're going to have, they obviously have an elite passing game with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and those other receivers there for the Bills. So the Ravens defense is going to be tasked very differently than they were last week. They were focused on game plan really to stop the run. This week, they're going to have to switch that up. The secondary is going to have a huge game for them. And that's going to be a good matchup because I think the Ravens defensively are a good team and the Bills offensively are a really good team. So it's a good matchup to certainly look at in this one. But I think what's going to come down to winning this game is going to come down from the other side of the ball for both teams. And I think it has to do with the Ravens offensively versus the Bills defensively. And I think for the Ravens, they certainly can run the ball. Lamar Jackson looked good running the ball last week, but like I said with the Rams, they have to be two-dimensional. They have to be able to throw the ball well. Lamar Jackson is going to have a better game passing the football than he did last week. And I'm not so positive if he can do that. I think the run game is always going to be there, but will the passing attack and the throwing game, especially the Ravens wide receivers aren't a really special group. So that's going to be tough. And then on the other side of it here with the Bills defensively, they need to play a better game than they did last week, I think. And I think that's a huge deal for them. Are they going to be able to stop the Ravens, maybe limit them and make them one-dimensional and do what they can to help stop the run and then force Lamar to throw the ball a lot, which I think would be of benefit for the Bills team. Something's got to give, I think, in that matchup. And I think that's why that's going to be extremely important in this game. And I like the Bills. I think defensively, they're going to play a better game than they did last week. And being a game as close as it is, I can't go against my partner. I can't take the Ravens in this game. I got to go with the Bills. I think they're going to find a way. It's going to be close, but I'll take the Bills defensively over the Ravens offensively in this one.
And Sam, I'm going to have to agree with you. I guess we're just Nick's biggest fans today. For me, it's an extremely interesting matchup. First of all, two 2018 first round quarterbacks in Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And then also, like you mentioned, and Nick also mentioned, both these two teams have such different game plans. The Ravens have been a very run heavy team. And it's interesting because the Bills' holes in their defense comes in that run game. They're one of the lower ranked teams in defending the run. And that's going to be an interesting matchup. But then when on the flip side, the Ravens have been really solid against the run. And the Bills don't really rely on that as much. But they have had lapses in pressure and coverage, which, exposes them sometimes in that secondary, which if you're facing Josh Allen isn't exactly what you want. Now, I'm a huge Josh Allen fan. I have been all season. Maybe I'm jumping on a bandwagon, but I just love watching the kid play. He's been phenomenal, and last week, he proved that he can play under pressure. He completed 26 of 35, 324 yards, 2 touchdowns, became the youngest quarterback in NFL history to throw for 300 yards and complete 70% of his passes in a playoff game. So, this young guy, he's proven that he can win close games. He's proven that he can win when it counts. And he's just been so impressive. And I think at the end of the day, if you're comparing Josh Allen to Lamar Jackson, and if that's, if that's what it comes down to, I'm going to go with Josh Allen every time.
Well, surprise, surprise, I'm going to be in agreement with both of you, but I do believe it and have some conviction behind it, because when you look at this matchup, what gave the Bills defense trouble last week, I think, was that not only was Indianapolis able to run the ball somewhat effectively, they were, although I thought the Bills did a decent job of keeping them in check for the most part. Naheem Hines gave them a little bit of trouble. But it's the two-dimensional nature of the Colts offense. I mean, they can really hurt you throwing the football, in particular with tight ends and with Michael Pittman and some of the receivers that they have, T.Y. Hilton. And Phillip Rivers is a guy who will not be fazed by anything and any look that you throw at him, as a dude that's been around the NFL forever. That's not the case with Lamar Jackson. And I feel like the Ravens' rushing attack is certainly more explosive and you're more confident in it than even Indianapolis. That said, they don't have as good an offensive line, and Lamar Jackson throwing the football, particularly on the third down, is a question mark for them that they will need to try and answer against a Bills defense that you're going to hope from a Bills perspective is going to be stronger than it was against Indianapolis, and I think it will. The Ravens against Tennessee had offensively a lot of things go right. They run for 236 yards and really dominated that game up front, and yet they only scored 20 points. They're going to need to score more than 20 points against this Bills offense. You lost me for a second there. That's all right. Especially with the way that the Bills can pass the football. It's not just, we'll take away Derrick Henry and you're all set. You can't take away Josh Allen in the Bills passing game. So when you try and break down that matchup, they're going to have to score more than 20 points. They were effective running the football, but the Titans are even worse against the run than the Bills. The Titans have given up more yards running than the Bills have this year. And yet, again, the Ravens, while effective, only score those 20 points. So that's the thing for me. And the question marks, certainly valid against the Bills defense. I think they'll be able to be good enough. If you remember week 14 last year, they had answers against Lamar Jackson, and it certainly will be. It's a new team, a new year, and different things that they'll have to get done with new personnel on the Bills side as well. But I felt like they had a very good game plan going into that one. I expect the same for this game, and they were able to contain Lamar Jackson as well as anyone was last year. When you go into the offensive matchup for the Bills against the Ravens defense, I think the way that the Bills play offense just puts a lot of stress on the Ravens. Spread offense, 4 wide receivers. It doesn't allow you to disguise perhaps as much as Wink Martindale and that Ravens defense would like. So it's problematic. And Josh Allen has been so good against the blitz. That's the bread and butter DNA of that Ravens defense. I would expect them to back off a little bit. But then you're talking about playing a defense that's not your identity. I think the Bills can force the Ravens into some things defensively that they don't want to do, and that bodes well in a matchup where you're trying to split hairs. This is, make no mistake about it, going to be a really close game. But I think the Bills on the margins can force the Ravens into things that they don't want to do, perhaps a little bit more than the Ravens can the Bills. And that's what I think is going to be the difference, but certainly a close one. Quickly, let's get on to Sunday. It's the Browns coming in off of a huge win against Pittsburgh, exercising some demons there. Baker Mayfield's so good, that defense without head coach Kevin Stefanski and a number of coaches and all the COVID issues that they had, they are able to get a win. They roll into Arrowhead, 14-2 Chiefs, defending Super Bowl champions who are a 10-point favorite. That line seems to me to be a little bit high, but regardless, the Chiefs have been so good all year, although maybe a little bit not as great as December rolled around. They're playing these close games. Some people are skeptical. I don't know that I'm there yet, particularly with Cleveland coming in.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. I think that the 10 points seems to be a lot. The Browns are going to be happy to have their head coach back. They're going to be happy to practice this week. They're going to be happy to have Denzel Ward, their number 1 corner. He's going to be back, and that's something they really need, because they're 22nd against the pass in the NFL, and they're facing Patrick Mahomes and this high-powered offense. They're going to need all the help they can get defensively. I think from the Browns' standpoint, to win this game, they're going to need a turnover or two from the offensive side of the ball for the Chiefs. They're going to need Baker Mayfield, Nick Chubb, and obviously the offense to play a very good game, which I think they will. But it's going to come down to can that defense get a couple stops, or can that defense turn the ball over a little bit or force a little bit of a turnover here for the Chiefs. It's really tough to pick against Kansas City, and it's really tough to pick against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, who has proved himself as a quarterback worthy of all the praise he gets. I think it's going to be a close game. The Chiefs don't blow a lot of teams out. I was seeing a lot of talk about the Chiefs. Are the Chiefs going to blow out the Browns this week? And I think no way. I think this is going to be a lot closer than that 10 points. But I can't pick against the Chiefs, and I'm not going to here. I got the Chiefs in this one. I think it's going to be very close.
Yeah, I mean, I see that 10-point spread, and I think no way, at least the Browns will cover. I do think the Chiefs will come out on top, but this game is essentially Cleveland's run game, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt versus Patrick Mahomes' arm. And, as good as Baker Mayfield has played this season, and he has played really well, he isn't Patrick Mahomes. He isn't the reigning Super Bowl MVP. And Patrick Mahomes has proven that he can play in prime time. He can play this late into the season. And you just look at that offense. It's just so explosive. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is the best receiver in the league, and he's a tight end. I mean, it's just so hard to match up against, especially, to me, the Browns' biggest defensive weakness is their secondary. And that's not a weakness you want when you're playing the Chiefs with that offense. And head coach Andy Reid, he's 19-3 coming off a bye. We talked earlier with those number 1 seeds coming off a bye, and I think he's going to get that 20th win come this Sunday.
Yeah, 19-3 is pretty compelling evidence for Andy Reid, one of the best in the business at the helm in Kansas City. And I don't think Cleveland's defense is good enough, quite frankly. I like what I've seen out of their offense. I think their run game is solid and can give the Chiefs some problems. I mean, the Chiefs are not world beaters on defense, although they've been good in spots when they've had to be over the last couple of years. This year, maybe not as much. They've struggled really in the red zone. But I just don't know that the Browns can piece together enough stops. And when you're talking about this game is going to become a shootout, who does that favor? It's got to be Kansas City, right? If this is going to be a game that's going to be played in the high 30s, low 40s, I'm talking points, not weather, they're going to be in really good shape, are Kansas City. And it'll be close. I'm with both of you that I think the 10 points is a little bit high. It's just like, it's more of a respect thing to me for Kansas City being the reigning Super Bowl champion, as opposed to, oh, this is really what's going to happen. I like Kansas City to take down the Browns. I think it'll be a closer game than certainly those 10 points would indicate. I just don't know that the Browns have enough on defense to slow them down. And then it gets Cleveland out of what they want to do. It's no longer about running the football. It's about Baker Mayfield dropping back and throwing it 40, 50 times. And he wasn't able to do that against the Jets in the regular season. I know that they're playing better right now, but I'm not in love with that formula. It's not what has elevated the Browns to this point, and I don't think they'll be able to play to their identity against a Kansas City Chiefs team that can score really well. Last matchup of the divisional round. Round 3, Bucks, Saints, Louisiana Superdome, New Orleans -3. It's so hard to beat a team 3 times in a season. I just think the Saints are going to do it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I think the defense for the Saints last week looked very good. I know the Bears offensively struggle quite a lot, but that defense has looked good against the Bucks during the regular season too. People forget, a lot of people have been picking the Bucks, which I understand, they're a very good team, but I think people are overlooking the fact that the Saints were able to beat the Bucks 38-3 in week 9. I know that's a long time ago, but the defense played really well and was able to figure out Tom Brady pretty effectively. I think that's going to be another thing they continue to do this time. Offensively, they were a little out of sync last week, a little unimpressive, I would say. They probably should have beat the Bears by more. But then again, they were getting Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Deontay Harris. All those guys were coming back in the same week. And that's a lot to ask, getting all these guys in sync all at once. I think the second week with all 3 of those guys back will be helpful. The offense will be firing a little bit more on all cylinders. It's certainly going to be a tough test. This Bucks team is very good. The Bucks offense is very good. I think the Bucks offense looked good last week against Washington, who's a good team defensively. So I expect a relatively high scoring game here. The offense is going to have to keep up. The defense is going to have to play just as good as they played last week, if not better. It's a lot to ask, beating a team 3 times in a row, but I think the Saints team is qualified and good enough to do it.
So I'm going to disagree with both of you. For me, I'm a Patriots fan. I have been a fan since Tom Brady was on the team, so maybe I'm biased, but no way Tom Brady loses to Drew Brees 3 times in one season. No way. This is the playoffs, and we're talking about Tom Brady. There's literally no one better at winning in the playoffs than Tom Brady. And now he's got an established receiving core, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Now Antonio Brown's been playing better. And he's led significantly lesser groups to Super Bowl rings. So I see them beating the Saints, beating the Drew Brees. I do think it's going to be a close game. Obviously, both teams extremely talented. And it's actually, people always say it's hard to beat a team 3 times, but the odds are actually in that if a team's beaten, since 1970, teams that have gone 2-0 against a team in the regular season are 14-7 against that team in the postseason. But this is Tom Brady. He had a Super Bowl comeback when he was down 28-3. So odds don't really faze him. And I think that he's able to lead his team in this situation and come out on top.
The one thing that I would say on those stats is that it's certainly a different environment this time around, especially with no fans in New Orleans, because generally when you've beaten that team twice, I would say almost never would that team then get the home field advantage of playing the playoff game the 3rd time. So that generally means who's at home, which you can kind of throw out the window this time around. I just think the Saints, top to bottom, one of the best rosters in the NFL, are going to find a way to get it done. I know Tom Brady's been great in the playoffs. Bill Belichick isn't on the sidelines for him this time around. So I'm skeptical. It's going to be a close game again. Just give me New Orleans over the Bucks. Tom Brady, a 2nd straight year with I guess what you'd call premature playoff exit. That'll do it for us here on One. A special thanks to our guests, Craig Carton of WFAN and Jon Helmkamp of Deadspin. As always, if you missed any of the show's segments or special features, they will be available on Facebook, Twitter, and on demand on YouTube. The sports director of WFUV is Bobby Chaffardini. Today's show has been produced by Alex Wolves. For Sam Davis and Kelly Bright with the headlines, I'm Nick DeLuca. Thanks for hanging out with us. One, as always, a production of WFUV Sports.